American Geophysical Union, and I'm also a member of the Society's Consortium Executive Committee. So on behalf of the Executive Committee, the Consortium Planning Committee, and AGU, it is my great pleasure to open this Society's Consortium's 5th anniversary annual convening, working, gathering, and celebration of representatives from over 100 member societies, as well as our close friends, partners, and sponsors. I think we had over 150 people registered for this meeting today. So you see people online as well as in person here today. We're very pleased to welcome you into the space at AGU. A side story, we renovated this building about 4 years ago, and then COVID happened. So we kind of went away, and now we're back in remote first policy. But this space here, we're very proud of this space, and the space gets a lot of usage. And if you're interested in seeing more about the technology we use in this net zero building for in Washington, D.C., we welcome you back to have a tour at any time for those of you who are local, even if you're coming from out of town here. So welcome again. We're thrilled to be hosting this meeting, this anniversary meeting, and our first hybrid convening. So after one convening in person and then 3 pandemic years of successive virtual meetings, we're delighted to have both options available this year. So for those of you participating in person, please make yourself at home at AGU and join us at a rooftop reception today at 5 p.m. Following the program. So please stick around for that. I think you enjoy the rooftop view as well. And for those attending virtually, we hope you can enjoy the many ways we'll foster a full community experience for you. Our convening theme this year is Advancing the Future of STEM, Transforming the Threat of Gender and Race, Diversity, and Equity Retrenchment into an Opportunity for Systemic Change. We'll recognize the challenges of this moment, gender and racial DEI backlash in the states, adverse Supreme Court rulings on women's health and affirmative action, and a heavily divided nation. But rather than wringing our hands, we'll look forward to the opportunities that these challenges present to drive bold, systemic change towards ethical, equitable, diverse, and inclusive fields for a future of excellence and integrity in STEM. We urge each of you to adopt a forward-moving action orientation. So we have many to thank for this event. First, our sponsors, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. We have reps here from Sloan Foundation and the American Education Research Association. Their support, along with our dedicated members' dues, makes the work of this consortium possible. We want to also thank the annual convening planning committee, Yvette Seeger, who's here in the room, Mark Beebe, and Sherry Miles Cohen. So thank you. As well as Taylor Shotwell and Ed Smith from Education Council. I know Taylor and Ed are here in the room. And they help make this convening a reality. And special thanks to the staff here at AGU, the conference facility host here, and FASIP, who have collaborated on logistics to create an integrated in-person and virtual home for all meeting participants. And thank you to our special speakers from societies, higher education, philanthropy, and the federal government and industry who are sharing their expertise and insights with us today. We're also very grateful for our hardworking members of our governing executive committee and our leadership council, as well as education council partners. And together we drive the consortium's direction, program, and for impact and value to our members. So we also recognize there are many members or participants here today who are not the primary reps to the consortium, but we are glad you're joining us here today. And last but not least, a special welcome to the friends of the consortium from our higher education advisory groups, as well as other close colleagues. These groups have collaborated with us and made major contributions to gender and racial equity work. Thank you for all that you do. And now I'll turn the program over to Jamie Lewis Keith, the Distinguished Senior Law and Policy Fellow at Education Council which is the consortium's originator and law policy partner. So Jamie will give you an overview of today and the convening's aims and gender, and let us get started. So Jamie.
Thank you, Billy. I think I have to adjust this quite a bit. And I hope you can see me. You can see through the podium if you can't see over it. I want to really thank AGU for hosting this convening and our sponsors from Sloan and AERA, as well as everyone involved in making it possible, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us online and in person. And as Billy said, we've got over 150 people registered, and it's really a testament to the commitment that all of you have to our shared mission and work as a collective. Our convening theme, Advancing the Future of STEM, Transforming the Threat of Gender and Racial DEI Retrenchment into an Opportunity for Systemic Change, recognizes the societal context in which this 5th year anniversary convening of the Society's Consortium is taking place. Indeed, from our origins, with the publication of the 2018 NASEM report on sexual harassment of women in academic sciences, medicine, and engineering, through 3 years of pandemic and ongoing racial and gender violence and injustice, each year, we remark that the consortium's society-facing and field-facing work could not be more critical. And yet each year, the imperative for our work seems to increase, as it has again this year. As reflected in our first strategic goal, the consortium was formed to catalyze the leadership and influence of academic and professional societies in STEM as the arbiters of excellence and ethics in the fields, as networking and mentoring and field leadership engines, as publishers of research, and as basic influencers that can drive systemic change toward gender and intersecting racial equity. And as reflected in the rest of our strategic goals, we aim to do this by engaging and sustaining the power of the collective and supporting the work that our members are doing back home and their fields to disrupt harmful conduct, climate, and culture, create welcome, and support all talent to thrive for excellence and integrity in STEM, with a special focus on women, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and people with intersecting racial identity.
I'm so tired.
The tangible depth and
I'll
breadth
look you up
of our
5 minutes early.
internally and externally facing work over the last 5 years, we can go to the next slide, please, are evident on this slide and in the accomplishments document linked to your participation materials. However, even as we celebrate this 5th year and our many accomplishments, it couldn't be clearer that the need for our work as a collective leadership endeavor is far from over. The current political and legal context of gender and racial backlash, adverse Supreme Court rulings, and gaps in STEM educational opportunity and attainment by gender and race threatens our ethics and future, particularly in light of gender and racial demographics and the outsized role that STEM plays in innovation and the health of all life and the planet. So within our convening themes, our objectives are to identify priority actions that could advance gender and racial equity, diversity, and inclusion in STEM, advance inclusive training, career, and leadership opportunities for generations of scientists, and demonstrate the leadership to drive systemic change. Building on Billy's point about opportunity, this convening intends to identify the actions that society's philanthropy and government as influencers of their fields could take toward these DEI aims, both collaboratively with colleagues in higher education and industry and on their own to boost the impacts of our efforts. And let's focus on 3 additional opportunities. First is to consider how we can maximize the promise of the consortium's existing resources, some of which are reflected on this slide. The ethical transparency tool to create a norm of transparency across the education research ecosystem about gender and racial harassment to advance a healthy climate. And you'll hear a lot more about the ETT pilot at lunch on Tuesday. The case study library to enhance empathy and prevent and respond well to harmful conduct. There's a breakout on this. And the leadership video library to share what it takes to lead bold change toward equity with candor about challenges and successes, possibly a way to ground a governance board discussion on related policies. Second is to recommit to the consortium's experience sharing resources. The members matching tool, you'll hear about its enhanced functionality later today. The consortium LinkedIn platform clip, hot topics webinars, chat and collaborate sessions, and the inclusive journals affinity group. If you may be interested in joining that group, come to the breakfast gathering on Tuesday or attend the virtual breakout later today, or later tomorrow actually. And third is to identify other existing resources that are exemplars that we might add to our public compendium of resources and experts, and also elevate any resource gaps that the consortium or other participants in STEM in our ecosystem could address. I ask all of us to think of this convening at this moment of challenge as the convening of opportunity. So here's an overview of our 2 days. We'll start with a keynote address by Dr. Holden Thorpe and an interview by Dr. Shirley Malcolm on allyship, leadership, and broad ecosystem activism to counter political attacks on gender and racial DEI in STEM. Next is an in-person networking lunch in this room, or a virtual breakfast lunch or lunch, depending on where you are, if you're participating online. Then our first plenary panel of top leaders from societies, philanthropy, higher education, and government sectors will inspire us to craft a bold, forward-looking vision for how ecosystem-wide efforts could build a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive future for STEM. Concurrent 50-minute topical breakouts related to our convening aims will follow, with separate in-person and virtual groups. And your participant materials include a link to the breakout that you've selected, so don't worry if you've forgotten it. That's natural. Next is our second plenary panel on empowering and advancing careers and leadership opportunities for early career professionals and graduate students in our societies and in fields. Marsha Lesky of Optica, our Leadership Council, will then introduce the enhanced membership matching tool. Please sign on today or as soon as you can. And we'll close day one with some key highlights, followed by the rooftop reception at 5 p.m. Eastern Time for everyone who's here in person. On day two, in-person participants can enjoy a networking breakfast beginning at 8:45 Eastern Time, affinity meetings beginning at 9:15, where you can choose a federal science update from Joanne Carney of AAAS, explore the Inclusive Journals Affinity Group, or join a Leadership Council gathering for its existing members, as well as anyone else who's interested in serving on this group, which we're so grateful to for guiding the consortium's programming and resource development. The formal program will begin at 10:15 Eastern Time on Tuesday and end at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. First will be a panel of leading researchers who will discuss research priorities for countering gender and racial DEI backlash and Supreme Court rulings. Next is a 45-minute concurrent breakout segment, followed by a 55-minute lunch block that will be divided in half, roughly, with time for networking and lunch, and then lunch and a discussion with AAAS, Johns Hopkins, and Vanderbilt leaders about the ethical transparency tool pilot. After lunch, we will have our final plenary panel on effective DEI communications, research, and strategies with the president of the National Communications Association, who's also a professor and researcher on communication science, and a highly effective DEI communications practitioner and researcher from Caltech, which will be moderated by our executive director of the National Communication Association, who is also co-chair of our executive committee. And we'll close the convening by 2:30 p.m., I promise. Because we are addressing gender and racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, I do want to highlight our focus within these terms, which have a range of law, policy, and research meanings. We are focused on women, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and those with intersecting racial identities targeted for bias and harassment that compound the burdens that people of any identity may experience. Disrupting those barriers and extra burdens to open opportunity, positive experiences, and outcomes in STEM is what we mean when we refer to equity. Diversity generally means the cognitive, creative, productive, interpersonal, and collaborative benefits that science shows people of all identities gain when they learn and work in communities that reflect a broad range of identities, experiences, perspectives, talents, and abilities. Inequities undermine gender and racial aspects of diversity by preventing talent from entering and driving talent from STEM fields. And inclusion means conduct, climate, and culture that are welcoming, where all talent feels belonging and can fully participate as individuals, persist, and thrive. And inclusion is necessary for both equity and diversity in STEM. And finally, on the next slide, intersectionality, paraphrasing Kimberly Crenshaw, recognizes that multiple forms of societal and field identity-based bias, harassment, and disadvantage compound simultaneously. So we must attend to the lived experiences of people who are subject to a combination of sex, gender, and racial oppression in their lives. And when we're addressing equity, diversity, and inclusion, the consortium's mission recognizes, and our work has increasingly focused on the importance of an intersectional lens. As we engage, please practice our inclusive norms. The convening conduct expectations are linked to your participant materials, and see the conduct do's and don'ts on your skinny agenda handout for today, or also emailed to you and to everyone, and take note of some of the highlights on the slide as well. The Chatham House rule applies to everything in breakouts only. Use the learning, but don't identify people or organizations. And to turn on closed captioning, click on show captions on your device. And with great thanks to AERA, ASL interpreters are available at all of our plenaries, and we thank them for their skill. Take note of our convening contacts and officials on this slide. Felice Levine, Shari Miles Cohen, and Billy Williams. They are wearing bright green badges and are here to help with any conduct concerns. And there are contacts for those participating virtually as well. We are audio and visual recording the plenaries and will release them broadly, including on social media with the slide deck. So if you don't want to be recorded, participate only on Zoom and don't identify yourself or your society in your Zoom window or in questions. Only Education Council and AGU are authorized to make recordings, so please don't do that. We will not, as I said, record any breakouts. This slide and your participant materials include the Wi-Fi and consortium website connection for this convening, and bios for our speakers are linked to your participant guide. So with all of that, I am now absolutely thrilled and delighted to welcome our keynote speaker and interviewer. Dr. Holden Thorpe is editor-in-chief of the Science family of journals, having previously served as the provost and a distinguished university professor in chemistry and medicine at Washington University and as chancellor of UNC Chapel Hill. In addition to many other leadership and teaching activities, Dr. Thorpe is an outspoken equity and diversity ally. And Dr. Shirley Malcolm, whom everyone knows, is the senior advisor to the CEO and Sea Change director at AAAS and co-chairs the Society's Consortium Executive Committee. She's a regent at Morgan State University and trustee of Caltech, and co-chairs the Gender Advisory Board of the UN Commission on Science and Technology. Dr. Thorpe, we welcome you to the podium. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie, and hello, everybody. Where's the clock? Oh, I'll just use this. It's wonderful to be with you all. You might wonder at a conference like this why someone is here representing the patriarchy. You know, if we don't get the white men on board with everything that we're trying to do, then the women and people of color will have to do what they always do, which is carry the burden for doing all the work. And so I am honored to be part of trying to solve that problem. And I want to start really by sharing some my views on kind of where we are with STEM and higher education generally, based on, as Jamie said, my time being a a provost and a chancellor, and now the editor of science. And then I'll be on Zoom with my good friend Shirley Malcolm, which is where we usually are. So that is very comfortable for us. And so she can ask me whatever she wants to about all the crazy adventures I've had or things that I've observed. And I want to acknowledge my colleagues, especially Valerie and Rachel, who are here, who have to actually lead universities. A lot of people read what I write and say, oh, you have so much courage. Actually, no, they're the ones with the courage, because, you know, I work for Shirley. I don't think I'm going to get in too much trouble with her for saying what I think about things. They're the ones who have to work for public university boards. And so on the one hand, you know, our administrators drive us crazy with their equivocating and everything, but they're the ones who really we have to trust to make the decisions about how to navigate all this stuff. And having had a lot of those experiences myself, including at the University of North Carolina, where I got run over by a truck, which is never in my introduction. They always go, oh, Dr. Thorpe, you know, he did all these wonderful things and he was a chancellor at UNC Chapel Hill. Saying I was a chancellor at UNC Chapel Hill is a very charitable summary of everything that happened when I was there. But I survived it, and I learned a lot, and I'm always trying to pay it forward with what I learned. So having done all that, I just know how hard it is to run public universities in this country, and I thank everybody who's willing to go try it. So let's see what we can talk about to help them out. All right, first slide. Now, when I go around and talk about politics and higher education and STEM, it makes a lot of people really nervous, because there's this culture that I think we're all fighting against, that, oh, we're not supposed to talk about all this stuff. We should just put our findings in the journals and let other people worry with this. But Albert Einstein didn't agree with that 75 years ago when he was talking about anti-Semitism. And so we should not feel uncomfortable about talking about these things now, even though a lot of people do. And, you know, that discomfort is a real barrier in talking about a lot of the things that we're here to talk about at this workshop. Okay, next slide. So it used to be politically useful to be in favor of science. All right, it wasn't that long ago, this is my lifetime, that Jack Kennedy could get up and say, we're going to go to the moon and make it all inspirational, and we're going to learn all this stuff. And of course, the moon, flying to the moon was only partly about science. It was also a lot about geopolitics. And it was a lot of other things. I mean, it was something that certainly didn't include everyone in the country. And if you ever watched The Summer of Soul, which is a great movie by Questlove about the Black Woodstock, the interviews in there about the moon mission are absolutely hysterical and revealing, if you haven't seen that. But it was politically useful for Jack Kennedy and his world to say positive things about science. And next slide. And now we're in a world where half the country wants to put our most famous scientists in jail for doing science. So this is a big change in my lifetime. We certainly didn't have anything like this in the 60s or 70s, where, first of all, Tony Fauci became the most famous scientist in the world. Before that, I don't know who it was. People had a hard time naming scientists. So the good news, there's at least one that a lot of people can name. The bad news is half the people want him in jail. And, you know, what explains this? So I spent a lot of time talking to historians and people who studied this a lot more rigorously than I have. Next slide. About this. And one interesting thing, this is from a Pew study. So there's high trust in science. 77% of the public trust scientists. 80% medical scientists. I don't get how medical scientists and scientists are related in this question. Are medical scientists not scientists? But anyway, they're within the error really of each other, so it kind of doesn't matter. I don't know why they broke that out. But you can see the trust in scientists generally is high. But if you look at it by political ideology, what you find is that Democrats, by a pretty good majority, want us to be involved in policy decisions, and Republicans don't. And this is really the divide that I think we're all trying to figure out with politics and science in this country. And I get a lot of emails from conservatives saying, you need, when I write about a lot of these things, well, you should just stick to science. And I write back and say, well, we studied gun control with actual quantitative methods, and we know it works. So that is science. And we know that abortion is good public health policy. And we know that there's systemic racism that we can measure. And so I don't really get why I'm not sticking to science by talking about these things. But it really stems from something that, you know, particular, I'm not going to be with you on the rooftop tonight because I teach at 5. My class is about science denial, and I teach out of Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway's book, Merchants of Doubt. And that whole book is really kind of about this very problem. And I have to remind people, yes, Science is a research journal, but it's also a magazine, and we do commentary in the front half of the journal. And so we express our opinions there. All right, next slide. And this is a less scientific survey. No, one more thing. So, you know, we compete bitterly in many ways with nature. But Magdalena Skipper and I have a really great relationship, and she's absolutely fantastic colleague. And we try not to be photographed whenever we're together because, you know, people think we might be cooking up some conspiracy or something like that, especially people who are interested in the origins of COVID and a few other things like that. But Magdalena is an absolutely great leader. And nature, unlike science, has the ability to make political endorsements. We're a nonprofit in America, so we don't do that. But it's totally within nature's rights to make endorsements. They endorsed Joe Biden in 2020. A lot of people got very fired up about this, thinking that they only did this because of this election, but they actually had been doing it for a long time. You know, they doubled down and said, we're going to cover politics now more than ever. And then, to their credit, they published a study in Nature Human Behavior that asked people if nature's endorsement lowered their trust in science. Well, and it did if they were conservatives, but they didn't ask, have you ever heard of the journal Nature before they asked him this question. Now, I'm the editor of Science. If I meet people who aren't in science and they say, oh, you're the editor of Scientific American. And I say, no, I'm the editor of Science. And they go, Science? You mean all of it? So most people don't know what science and nature are. So, you know, and this is important because, you know, thankfully for me, my boss, Sudha Parikh, has told me, your job is to write for scientists. That's who reads the journal. And that's most people who know about our journal. And so what I write every week is, what do I think other scientists want to read in their journal? That's my mandate. And so then Nature doubled down and said, yes, we're still going to endorse political candidates, even though we published this paper. And that created a huge brouhaha on an app that I don't go on anymore because it's run by a psycho, formerly called Twitter, and there were a lot of scientists who disagree with Nature doing this. And there are a lot of scientists who do. So this is a very, very big debate that, in my opinion, is not resolved. We can talk more about this later, but there are plenty of scientists who are still in the school that says we should keep our head down because we don't want people thinking that we think about this stuff, I guess. I don't agree with them, but that's certainly not a resolved point in our community. Okay, next slide. And this is a less scientific survey that I did at the American Society for Pharmacology meeting. One of the weird things about being the editor of Science is that every society thinks you can come to their meeting and talk about their discipline. I'm an inorganic enzymologist, so if there's a bioinorganic chemistry meeting, I could probably go do that one. But I tend to give general talks like this when I go to societies. And if you look at this, so there were 500 people in the audience. Most of them were graduate students and postdocs. And if you ask them, you know, do you think scientists should speak out about politics? There are various kinds of caveats and things here. You know, lots of people say when inaccurate data is touted as fact. Some people say all the time. Depends when the scientific integrity of your research is compromised. And one person out of 500 said never. That person came up to me after the talk and criticized, you know, all of my, stuff I said that he said was divisive. And after he yelled at me for 15 minutes, he pointed out that, you know, I had said during the talk that I had grown up in the theater, which I did. That's a very big part of my identity. And he said, well, this is what happens when theater people are allowed to do science. So I'd never gotten that one before, but you know, you have a job like mine, you get a lot of interesting feedback, let's say. But anyway, the point of this is that our young scientists are very aware of all this political tension. And so for the leaders to pretend like it's not there is very disingenuous in my view. Okay, next slide. And part of the problem is that we've told people that science is done by individual humans, mostly old white guys with facial hair who get hit on the head with apples or run out of bathtubs and are doing this all by themselves. And we haven't told them that science isn't like that, that it's a messy process, that we have to correct ourselves all the time, and that it's done by diverse groups of people, many of whom don't get any credit. That, you know, another great editor of Nature was somebody named John Maddox, who was the editor for a long time. Somebody asked him how many papers in Nature were wrong. He said all of them, because some of them are wrong, but the rest of them are all going to be replaced by other research that gets done in the future. And we've just done such a lousy job of explaining this to people. And I think part of it is ego on our part. We want to have the definitive answer, and we don't want to do the hard work of bringing people into this real conversation. Okay, next slide. So what have a lot of these things caused? Well, public confidence in universities is plummeting. A lot of that is conservatives who don't like the way they believe things are going on with politics. And I believe, you know, the main problem there is that we've also done a lousy job of explaining that actually most professors teach the students to show up. And if you do surveys about what the faculty say to students, you see very little evidence that there's any kind of political indoctrination going on from the faculty. Now, there's perhaps some from their fellow students. I don't know that we have anything that we can do about that, but I think every professor in this room, when their students show up, they assess who those students are and they do what's best to help them learn. And I teach lots of classes about politics, and we have conservatives in there, and I've never had any problems with this, and I think most professors don't, but we've done a poor job of explaining this. You know, I always say, look, if we're indoctrinating students, why can't we indoctrinate them to read the syllabus? All right, next slide. And, you know, I think the greatest readout of the problems we have are the strikes that we're having among the graduate students. You know, anybody who looks at this and doesn't see a systemic problem, I think is really kidding themselves. This is happening because we have pushed down the wages of the people in the labs. We've not given them sufficient credit for what they're doing. Sudip and Shirley had a great piece in Science a while back about this that I encourage you to read. We had these strikes at WashU when I was provost. we actually are the one place that where the students ultimately did not vote to form a union, which we achieved because Bill Tate, who was the dean of the graduate school, and now the president of LSU, and I went out and actually talked to all the students, which we were ordered not to do by the union busting lawyers that the university had hired, but thankfully we did it anyway. And the students said, you know, I think I trust Bill and Holden more than I trust the union. And once the election was over, we gave them most of what they wanted. And there hasn't been another organizing committee that I'm aware of at WashU since then. But I was officially put in timeout by the law firm, and they told me I was not to talk to the students. And I said, this is the sanitized version, that I was the chief academic officer of the university and I would talk to the students anytime I wanted to. And I think most, you know, I have a different attitude about a lot of these things because everything I went through at North Carolina. And so I didn't feel any risk in doing this. And it worked out great. But I think what all of these things are telling us is that we've mistreated these people who are critical to our future, and we can't figure out a way to make it right. I feel for everybody who goes to these strikes. It's miserable. But you know, the answer is not hiring union busting lawyers and criticizing the graduate students who are on strike. My son was in the bargaining unit at Columbia, where he's a graduate student. And let's just say he got some really good advice about how to outsmart the university on their contract. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so, you know, now to the main things that we're here to talk about. We've just launched something we're really proud of called Expert Voices, which is a new column in Science that's online only that I hope you'll see every week when the table of contents comes out. We've got 17 people that are going to write for us 3 times a year, and they represent every country, every race, every gender, intersectional identities, every field. And, you know, we're writing very engagingly, I think, about lots of issues. This is one of the first ones we had from Augustin Fuentes, who's probably somebody you're all familiar with at Princeton. You know, he says some really important things about how, let's see. He said, some will decry this essay as woke and use it as an example of how the journal Science has fallen off the path of true science. If being woke means actively considering the available data, analyses, and responding to them by considering the social context, histories, and processes that facilitated and created them, then being woke is just doing good 21st century science, something we should all endeavor to do. That's a great position statement for everything we're trying to do. Next slide. We advancing the slide? Oh, yeah, and here's somebody else we ought to listen to, and this is a great entree into the questions, because Shirley wrote a terrific piece that I think kind of sums up this whole thing that we're here to talk about, which is that we're not going to achieve what we want to achieve in science, whether it's the endless frontier or any other platitude that you want to throw out there, if we don't solve the human challenge, if we don't attend to the people who are marginalized, if we don't do a better job of improving the salaries and working conditions for our graduate students and postdocs. And if, probably most importantly, we can't figure out a way for the administrations of science in Washington and also at the institutions to start talking about all these problems the same way I'm talking to you now. Now, like I said, it's a lot easier for me. I'm not going to get a note from the legislature when I get back because that somebody zoomed into this talk and heard all these woke things I'm talking about. But as long as we're just hiding behind our attorneys and sending out press statements and equivocating, because we care more about our budget than we care about the human beings inside these institutions, then we're going to end up with these challenges. And I congratulate you for having this meeting to talk about this. And those are the things I wanted to say as an introduction to this. And now I get to answer any question that my good friend Shirley Malcolm has, and I thoroughly enjoy doing that whenever I get to. So thank you all very much for including me, and I look forward to the conversation we're about to have.
Give you a big round of applause. I just wanted to start off with a softball. You showed the picture there of the students who are on strike. And I hear them and I see them. And a lot of people think that it's about the money. And they don't really understand that the students are also talking about the treatment in the labs. And part of the treatment in the labs actually relate to what this organization was, this consortium was actually stood up to do. And that was to address the kind of harassment and the behaviors that that really end up being exploitative. And the whole question about harassment is really one that the university does a poor job of dealing with. How can we, in fact, begin to help people understand that the harassment isn't just a Title IX compliance issue, but it's a science issue?
Yeah. So of course, people are going to be more creative and achieve more if they feel safe. And so if we do think, and they feel supported, and you know, we're drowning in psychological research that shows all this, that stereotype threat is a real thing, and that all kinds of negative signals get in the back of your mind, stop you from achieving what you want to achieve. And so that's shouldn't even be in dispute. But yet, because psychologists have nailed this over and over and over again in many labs and many contexts and so on. But yet we have a culture where a lot of people think that, you know, pushing their students and making it challenging and having a brutal competitive environment is actually going to get more out of people, even though there's not a shred of psychological research that supports that. Everybody does better if they get positive feedback. And so setting aside all of the identity issues and everything else, you know, step one would be to just say, you know, people are going to get more research done and do it more effectively if they're in a positive environment. But, you know, these institutions, unfortunately, are very afraid to deal with this. I mean, here's co-chaired a National Academies panel on laboratory safety. It was after the tragic accident at UCLA where somebody died in a chemistry lab. And there it was clear that, you know, in the research that we did and the graduate students that we interviewed, they were saying, look, there's things we're doing handling chemicals that are unsafe, but our PIs are telling us we have to work at night and we have to get more work done and we have to be in the lab by ourselves. And we're trying to tell them these things are unsafe and they're not listening to us. So I think you could take that and apply it to sexual harassment, gender discrimination, and all kinds of other things, that if we don't have a culture where the PIs are hearing from the people at the bench and the people up the chain in the university aren't experiencing that information, then of course nobody's doing anything about it, because that information is all being pushed down and under, you know, under wraps. And we need to get all that information out in the open and not be afraid to deal with it.
You have been really out front and, I call it Hold It Unchained, really willing to speak about these issues in a way that others are not. You already pointed out that as editor of science, you don't have a legislator telling you that you can't say things. But what is the role of allies? We obviously need a lot more of them, people in positions of power who are willing to speak out and to advance gender and racial ethnic equity, even though we are kind of in the midst of DEI issues being unpopular politically, uh, there are good reasons about the quality of science that you want for people to speak out. But where are the allies and how do we get more?
Well, I think there are more, there are more coming gradually, but I think that everybody's, unfortunately, a lot of people are nervous about money. They want more money in the federal government into science, so they don't want to say things that provoke one side or the other that might affect the federal budget for science. The universities want more money, so they want to be nice to everybody in the legislature. And the problem is, when you need this many friends, you can't say anything that upsets anyone. And, a lot of this stuff makes people really uncomfortable. And, speaking for the white men, so I learned a lot about this, probably more about this kind of thing from Bernadette Gray Little, who I worked with in every administrative role I had at UNC. She was the dean when I was the department chair. She was the provost when I was the dean. And then when I became the chancellor, we worked together for a year before she went to go be the chancellor at the University of Kansas. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the Meyerhoff program and Freeman and Mike Summers. Well, Freeman and Mike, unbeknownst to us, decided to that they wanted to try to replicate Meyerhoff at a public university, and they chose North Carolina and also a university I refer to as Shirley Malcolm University, which some people call Penn State. So Mike came down to talk to us about this and spent the whole day with us. And the very last meeting was him and Bernadette and me. And I think then she was the provost and I was the dean of arts and sciences. And after she spent the day with Mike, Bernadette, I don't know if you all know her, she's very, very reserved. Which was good for me because as a white boy with 2 English last names, I asked her a lot of stupid questions over the years, but she was always patient at giving me the answers. And after she met Mike and he left our office and we're standing there, she said, "Holden, if you want to be an ally in all this, Mike Summers is a great example of how you do it." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "He's not nervous. He's saying he for all he knows, he's going to say something that is not right, but he's going to take that feedback in stride and adjust down the line. He's not stammering every time he has to say the race of someone. He's at ease with this." And took me a long time to aspire to be as at ease as Mike Summers, but that's of course burned in my mind that she told me that. So I think that, part of the problem as far as white allies are concerned is everybody's just afraid of saying the wrong thing. And we need a culture where you can say the wrong thing and recover from it. And for those of us who've said the wrong thing a lot of times and recovered from it, like I have, we're a little more used to being able, the fact that we can do that. But a lot of people haven't taken that chance and they're afraid. That's not the only factor. I think the money is the biggest factor. And we've got to decide, when is it the case that human beings are more important to us than money? And most of these institutions can't do that.
Given the role of DEI and its relationship between the quality of science and the inclusiveness of technology, how can people begin to see, how can agencies and funders even begin to see that not addressing these issues is giving you science that isn't as good or technology that isn't as inclusive? How do we begin to kind of change this conversation?
Yeah, well, that's been studied so many times as well. I certainly encourage people who do research on this to keep doing it, but we have more than enough research to make the case, right? If it was true that we could just put stuff in journals and the other people would figure out the right thing to do with it, which was what Vannevar Bush told us all to do, in my opinion, that idea has run its course. Then this would be taken care of because there's more than enough experimental evidence out there to support the idea that a team that has lots of different perspectives and viewpoints is going to give you a more robust consensus than one that doesn't have that. So I don't think doing more research is necessarily the answer. I think, again, part of it, I mean, I wrote an editorial that was pretty tough that you told me to write about the fact that if the NIH and the NSF have all these platitudes on their website about diversity, are they going to stop making grants to universities in the state of Florida, which has decided that you're not allowed to do all this stuff? I mean, who decides where those two things intersect? I got a very, statement written by a PR person, I'm sure, or a government affairs person from the NIH saying, something like the NIH does not violate state laws. All right. That says nothing. Why are they saying that? Because they want the appropriation for the NIH to be as large as possible. And they're not willing to decide whether the platitudes on their website, and they have Kimberly Crenshaw and a lot of other strong voices on their website, but I'm pretty sure if Dr. Crenshaw was here, she would say, okay, well, you shouldn't be making grants in the state of Florida.
Yeah, how do you in fact do clinical trials that include diverse individuals that's probably coordinated through some office that has diversity and inclusion in its name?
Yeah, I don't know. Nobody, everybody, a lot of these things remind me of when I was involved in crises and intercollegiate athletics, which of course have all these same issues baked into them. And every time you bring up athletics at an AAU meeting of all the presidents, everybody just stares at their paper, hoping they're not the one that gets called on. Because these are issues that nobody wants to talk about. And the longer you go with not out talking about them, the worse they're going to get. And doesn't want to talk about intercollegiate athletics either. Yeah. So yeah, I just think that the institutions are trying to bob and weave and not get in these conversations. And, that's my analysis, whether they should try to get out of it, do more or not. Like I said, I'm not the one sitting in their chair. They're the ones that have to make those decisions. And for the most part, they're people I have known for a long time and trust. But I don't envy them. I think the reason is that, they're afraid to bring out these, because if you say, well, DEI is not important to us anymore, you got all these problems on the campus. And if you say we prioritize it more than getting our budget, then the feds or the legislature are going to penalize you. And nobody can figure out what to do about that.
Well, one of the things that obviously we're going to have to figure out is when it starts to affect our ability to do the science and the quality of the science we can do. And I think that it's starting to ramp into that space. And so I think at some point the agencies are going to kind of have to do something.
I mean,
If you can't implement your proposal as submitted, you got a problem.
Yeah, but don't you think that that's already happened? I mean.
Yes, I do,
Yeah,
but
if
I'm just
grad
saying though, it
students are on
hasn't
strike,
gotten called
yeah,
out,
right.
right? Now, let me just shift gears here before I turn to your audience, and this is as editor-in-chief of Science, you can talk about renorming, restructuring within the publishing world. And how you've made some moves already to really address kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, not only in terms of the putting in space for editorials and opinions and things like this, but kind of changing the structure. What do you think, what more can we do uh, coming from the kind of professional society and journalism world to really double down on some of this?
Yeah, so so as you say, you know, we've done a lot more to get lots better representation in the parts of the journal that we have the most control over, which is the commentary area and in news. And we have better representation among the editors and journalists than we had. It's still meager compared to what we need, but it was zero when there were zero Black and Hispanic and Native folks that were editors or reporters when I got to Science, and it's a little bit better now. Infinitely better, because if you divide by zero, you get infinity. Yeah. So it's now a finite number, but those folks are still pretty lonely, and I'm grateful to them for being pioneers with us. But the most important thing I think we can do is try to shed light on the hidden curriculum that goes into how you get a paper in a journal like ours. And this is something I tell every audience, and thanks for bringing this up because I would have forgotten. Oh, I tell them two things. One is, if every paper you submit to Science and your career is rejected, you can still be the editor-in-chief. And the other thing I tell them is that absolutely everyone who sends an idea for a paper to me, who wants some feedback on it, will have it forwarded to the appropriate editor and will get some feedback prior to submitting it. The big shots all know they can do this, and they write to the editor and start working them ahead of time. Most of the young people coming up and people who are underrepresented don't know that's the case. So ask Siri my email, send me a few paragraphs or some figures from a paper you're thinking about sending to us, and I will get you some feedback as to whether it's worth your time and effort to write them up and send it to us. That's a hidden curriculum that powerful white guys with high H indexes and big labs know, and we need to make sure everybody knows that. And I get to the bottom of my email 2 or 3 times a week, and I promise you, I will get it to the right person. So we need to tell as many people that as we can.
Yeah. I was in one of the conversations with some of the other science, the, immunology, translational medicine, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the editors said, I'm not sure we ask people to describe the people who make up the cohort.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, that was a conversation that actually yielded some immediate response of asking about the data and how the data are rolled out there. I mean, it's only been since 2016 that NIH has required the sex as a biological variable. Yeah, maybe if our editors start saying, "Give me your data disaggregated," that in fact that we can start making additional headway.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll put that on the list and start working on that.
I
Every
think
time
they're
you tell me
already
to write
working
about
on
something, I
that.
always get a lot of attention for it. So
Yeah, yeah. Okay, all right. Let's turn now to the audience questions. Who's going to manage that for me in the room?
well, we've got
And I can manage it myself for those of you online, if you just throw it into the chat. Okay, who's
Sure.
first?
Shirley, we're going to alternate between in-person and hybrid to allow.
Okay, sounds good. All right, I have a chat one, all right?
Okay.
If nobody's raised their hands. Says, how do we be more preventive and proactive to ensure that things don't get worse for DEI
Mhm.
at state, national level law, that we being the faculty, professional society staff, students, postdocs, etc., acknowledging that everyone has different power and agency.
Yeah, why don't you start with that one, Shirley? Didn't you write the book on all that?
Well, the thing is that I have talked a lot to Jamie, and she will tell you that I have concerns about the issue of preventive stuff, and that we have an opportunity to prevent people from becoming their harassing professor uh, by lifting up preventive, by teaching people better. And I do, in fact, think that you use the power that you have, whether it is the power to call something out when you see it in the lab, to basically not let people get away with it when comments come in and pushing back on them. So I do think that all of us can do a lot more. Okay.
Yeah, and I think the institutions, I mean, the biggest problem with the institutions is that they're all chasing the wrong things. They're chasing rankings, they're chasing more grant dollars, they're chasing wins in athletics, they're chasing helping people get elected governor. And there's just so little priority placed on actually taking care of the human beings that are inside these institutions. And when you do it well, you don't get rewarded for it at all. And until we change that, we're going to continue to have these problems. I mean, you know, what would be great is if we didn't need DEI programs or Title IX because we did such a good job of looking after everyone. But there's absolutely no sense of that. If you go to, I'm on the board of trustees at St. Louis University, and you're on the board of Caltech and Morgan. And yeah, you know, you go to these committee meetings where they talk about student development or whatever, but if you are a president who was just really, really good at looking after the people on your campus, and you didn't feed all this arbitrary stuff to the politicians and the trustees, you wouldn't get to keep your job. And it should be the other way around. And it's not. And as long as it's not, then this stuff is all done after the fact. Oh, we need DEI now because we have all these marginalized folks who are upset correctly. And they wouldn't have been upset if we'd had compassionate, inquisitive people who cared about them. And to me, that's like the main, that's why I'm not a university administrator anymore. That's
Well,
the
I
stuff
know
I like to do, and nobody cared when I did it, except the people who
well,
was helping.
that's why you have the best job ever right now.
Yes, correct.
Okay, the room.
Yeah, there's one here.
Say, and I'll run my friend Yvette, and I will run the mic. So if you just raise your
She's got a
hand.
question.
So you talked about increasing representation in all the areas of the magazine that you control.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could illuminate what you don't control and then
Yeah.
what it would take for you to control that.
Oh, yeah. So that was a cryptic way of saying, so for a commentary piece, those are mostly solicited. So I can solicit whoever I want. The research articles, you know, we're partly subject to what comes in. And that is subject to all the bias and everything that we're all here to talk about. And so to improve the representation there among PIs, we have to, like I said, break down the hidden curriculum so that the people who don't know how to write their paper in a way that will get it in, and don't know that they can do a pre-submission inquiry, and don't know all the tricks of the trade that the overrepresented folks are using, then, you know, they can send us stuff that can compete. I mean, on the borderline, on the edges, we can definitely do more to give more folks the opportunity to submit and get reviewed. But at some point, we have to have some support in the file to publish a paper. And so so that's why I say we don't completely control that. So we have to work to get submissions. And of course, we have to work to educate our editors that there's more to what goes in the paper than just the results, and that, not everybody has the same opportunity to produce a paper that's going to get into science. But that's a harder thing to dismantle, and something that we have to continue to be vigilant about.
Okay, I have two questions here that are pretty much asking the same thing, and I will start off with a short answer, and then I will pass it to you. And the whole question about is, how do you get institutions to change? I mean, that's the bottom line on the institutional structure itself is valuing the wrong things. And you cannot, and how do you really start to move that? And so that means that if you're valuing the money coming in from the agencies and you're playing the hyper competitive game, et cetera, you tolerate the people who are harassers, serial harassers even, because they bring in the grants and they get the big clubs and they get the awards and things like this. And so how do you begin to kind of make moves that do that? And I have two things that I will say quite quickly, and then I'll pass it to you. Is that you've got to focus on the entire institution. You cannot, in fact, you've got to drive towards system change. And that's why I have stood up and worked with AAAS and Standing Up Sea Change to try to move the whole institution, because you cannot pick off one thing or the other, or put in place workarounds in order to deal with this, or just deal with that. It is a structure that, in fact, keeps that in place. And the other is about the agencies. And you've got to start calling the funding agencies on some of this. Recently, there was a guy, and I thank science for lifting this up and putting it in the news pages, that this guy had basically had gone through all the Title IX processes, arduous as that is, and been found to be a problem, a big problem. And yet he was able to take 2 grants with him to a new place. First of all, he was able to go to a new place, all that history, take 2 grants from NIH with him and get a new grant. There's something that is fundamentally off about all of that. Hold up.
Well, unfortunately, the only thing in my view, this is a more radical answer, that has really changed institutions is activism. That's, I had, another person that taught me a lot about all this was someone named Franklin McCain, who was one of the Greensboro Four. He was on the board of governors of the University of North Carolina when I was the chancellor. And there's a statue of him in Greensboro. They did make change. Some of it walked back, but not all of it. And so I think one problem that I see, and this is something I didn't suffer from, as already told you about the graduate students, the activists, first of all, most of them are underrepresented people who shouldn't have to do this work. And so we should be compassionate and grateful for that. And the other thing is, most of the time they're trying to help the institution do things that they say they stand for. So why are they getting arrested and criticized and all of this stuff? They're really, most of them, you could find what they're saying in the university's mission statement. But yet, people won't, the administrators won't meet with them. They say, they send out, like, it's so weird. You admit somebody to your college and you send them this letter that says, you're joining this diverse a supportive community that's here to make everybody better and find the truth and all this stuff. And then 6 months later, you're sending out another email saying, you know, this student doesn't represent what XX university stands for. Like, how the hell did that happen? Instead, what you ought to say is, you know what? I mean, I always tell administrators, if you're talking to an activist, just imagine it's John Lewis. Because the administrators who are ugly to John Lewis 50, 60 years ago, you can bet they regretted it. And how do you know that that person that you're talking to isn't going to be John Lewis 20 or 30 years from now? For all you know, they are. They're doing, you know, SNCC had all kinds of subversive tactics. And you know, most of these schools turned around and invited John Lewis to come be their graduation speaker, and they all gave him a standing ovation after he talked about good trouble and everything. But yet your own activists, you can't give them the same treatment. I mean, a lot of people in this room would know that Annie Clark and Andrea Pino, who are really the people, two of the most influential people in getting Title IX through, they went to UNC and they wrote a Title IX complaint that's one of the most famous of all time, and it was addressed to me, okay? And my relationship with those two individuals still goes on to this day, and I did everything I possibly could to help them, even though they were basically suing me. And guess what? I didn't end up at the end of the hunting ground in that montage they did where all the college presidents who'd done bad things were getting yelled at. You know why? Because I love Andrea and Annie with every fiber of my being. And they made an enormous positive contribution to higher education. We should be grateful to them. So I think the thing the institutions could do is quit being ugly to their activists. Treat them with respect and recognize that this is the only force that's ever done any good. As the students, how did the Confederate statue in Chapel Hill come down? I didn't take it down. I damn sure wish I did. Students pulled it down. How did we get Title IX? How did we get all the Black Studies departments? How did we get all these good things that we take credit for? All came from student activism. But yet, when we get a big protest, we're hiding under our desk and sending out statements and arresting people like it's some terrible thing because it makes everybody uncomfortable. As a rant for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. The last question is in the room.
Yeah.
Yes,
From
last
Billy.
question in the room is from Billy Williams. So Holden, thank you for your comments, but you've talked about some of the limitations or some of the pressures that academic institutions might feel because of their funding needs and knowing where the money comes from. And that leads into what we have often talked about, you know, Shirley and I and Jamie and others about the unique role and unique opportunity for professional societies to play in this space because we don't have those same direct limitations. Could you just speak to that? Because you said it indirectly, but we say it more directly for people in this room about the position for professional organizations, scientific societies to have a bold role in this space. Please.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm certainly proud of so many of the things that we have at AAAS and Sea Change. I mean, Sea Change is a radical, subversive, activist program, and yet the AAAS is holding it out as, you know, one of the most important things that we do, and I agree that it is. So it's clear that if the largest society can do that, that everybody can. And I think that we have, I do think the societies can play a huge role in this for that very reason. And of course, we're here with all of you, and I congratulate you again for pulling this meeting together. And we're here in a famous building of one of the great societies of DC. So this is probably the place that can do this because also we confer a certain amount of legitimacy and recognition to these institutions that they want. And we know one thing they want is recognition. And so the more recognition we give to people for doing these things that come from these third parties, probably that, is certainly has a useful effect. So thank you for including me in that. And always good to see my friend with the headphones. And
I'll
thank you all
see
very
you in
much. It's great.
person on Wednesday if you're there.
I'll be there. Okay.
Let's thank, that's everyone, online and in the room. Thank Holden for a rousing and courageous conversation.
Great to be with you all.
I want to thank the speakers as well, thank Holden and Shirley. And I'll just point out that 2 years ago, Nicole Buchanan from Michigan State talked about an NSF project that she's working on to actually measure epistemic exclusion of meaningful research by marginalized groups based on gender and race. And I think that just building on what Billy's last question was, one of the things that we can think about in this convening is what we can do as societies, partnering with the agencies and the institutions, because it's not any one sector's responsibility, it's really all of us. And so part of what we need to think about is how we can contribute to that and deal with all the things that Holden and Shirley raised as very legitimate, important issues. But I don't want to give us a pass either, because we have a major role in this. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Taylor Shotwell to make some announcements.
Thanks, Jamie, and thanks, Dr. Thorpe and Dr. Malcolm. So now we are going to transition to lunch. We have until 1 p.m. Eastern time for lunch. For those of you on Zoom, feel free to use it as a networking lunch, or I guess breakfast for those of you on the West Coast. We will stop recording though for those of you if you want to talk over Zoom. So none of your conversations will not be recorded. So lunch will be out in the lobby. So you are welcome to eat out there. You're welcome to eat in here. But at 1 p.m. we will reconvene for the next plenary on promoting bold, forward-looking action in a challenging context, societies and STEM ecosystem partners collaborating for an inclusive future. So please go eat lunch, and we will see you promptly at 1 p.m. Eastern time.
I'm just going to stand for 2 seconds. Yeah, and Therese. Sure. Oh, is she here? Okay, good.
Before we get started, and Janice, I'm gonna put you on the spot. I just want to acknowledge that our AGU interim CEO is here in the room. She was here earlier this morning as well, Janice LaChance. So I want to introduce her because she's one of the persons responsible for helping us to make this possible here in this space. So Janice, thank you.
Thank you so much, Janice. It's great to meet you, and we're thrilled that you're here with us and can enjoy part of this with us. So welcome back from lunch, everyone. We are so fortunate to be welcoming our next panel, our first panel that is really focused on promoting bold, forward-looking action by each sector of STEM ecosystem on its own and in collaboration with others to advance DEI for a future of excellence and integrity in STEM in challenging times. And I just want to invite, I hope the panel and all of us to don't completely suspend reality, but really think about the actions, the positive things that we can do to address some of these issues and really look at this as a distributed responsibility. It's not any one sector, it's all of us together that really need to do this work. So our moderator and panelists are distinguished in their sectors. Charisse Carney-Nunez is a policymaker and lawyer, and the panel's participatory moderator. You're going to hear from her. And the Deputy Division Director of NSF's Division of Graduate Education in STEM, having served with increasing responsibility in that division and earlier in NSF's Office of General Counsel. Oops, sorry. 2 seconds. I just skipped ahead. Dr. Brandon Jones, a geophysicist, is the president-elect of our host AGU, having served in many board leadership roles and perhaps most salient to this convening in AGU's initiatives on building the talent pool, leadership development, and a strategic plan. Dr. Jones' day job is serving as program director for education and diversity programs in NSF's Geosciences Directorate. Dr. Adam Falk, a theoretical physicist, is president of the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, having previously served as president of Williams College and before that as Dean of Arts and Sciences, Dean of the Faculty, and a faculty member at Johns Hopkins University. And he's a trustee at Mount Holyoke College and on the board of PBS. Dr. Valerie Shears Ashby is president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and the first woman to serve in this role, having served as Dean of Arts and Sciences at Duke University, chair of the chemistry department at UNC Chapel Hill, and a professor at Iowa State University, all with dedication to diversity and equity as integral to excellence. And Dr. Rachel Croson, an economist, is executive vice president and provost at University of Minnesota, having served as Dean of Social Science and Professor of Economics at Michigan State University, Dean of the Business School at University of Texas at Arlington, Division Director for Social and Economic Sciences at NSF, and on the faculty at University of Texas at Dallas and University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. She's a supporter of women in economics professoriate, and we're particularly grateful to Dr. Croson for her distinguished service on the Society's Consortium's Ethical Transparency Tool Advisory Group, which you'll hear more about tomorrow at lunch. Unless they specifically state otherwise, our panelists are expressing their own views, not speaking on behalf of their organizations, but of course, they bring their substantive experience and knowledge from those roles as well as their own lives. So I'll now pass this panel over to Dr. Carney-Nunez. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So I am a representative of the National Science Foundation, but because of that, I always like to start with our mission, which is to promote the progress of science, advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and to secure the national defense, and for other purposes. Increasingly, it's like national and economic security. We fund science at the cutting edge to maintain US global leadership, and we can't do this without reaching the full spectrum of diverse STEM talent. We find innovation anywhere and create opportunities everywhere. We are at a pivotal moment, as we're talking about today, for science and society amid political and legal challenges to the diversity, equity, and inclusivity interests that are integral to the excellence and integrity of science, which we all know is an engine of innovation in a global knowledge economy and critical to the health of all life and the planet. This is a time for individual and collective leadership, not retrenchment, a time to be innovative, not uncreative, a time when we need collaborators and not spectators. Last month, the Biden administration released its R&D priorities for the FY25 budget. It was called one priority was reducing barriers and inequities. That was one of the priorities in that memo, and that memo called it our nation's great unfinished work. Agencies were directed to undertake R&D advances in ways that strengthen our values as a nation. So if you listen to Jamie's recorded talk, if you did your homework, which I did, Jamie, but she also reminded us today that the law is just a design parameter. And as scientists, we are skilled at navigating design parameters for innovation. So as we take up this great unfinished work, I know what we're thinking about at NSF in my directorate, the STEM Education Directorate, is that we must lean into what we are already researching, what we know, what we are already doing around building networks, connecting institutions and individuals, advancing institutional transformation. One great example is our Eddie Bernice Johnson Includes initiative, which years ago was identified as one of NSF's big ideas. And for those of you who don't know, it is a national network of over 4,000 institutions, systems, bridge programs, and industry and nonprofit partners moving collaboratively to remove barriers, promote best practices, and catalyze systemic comprehensive change. This work is open and inclusive and should not be impacted by the recent SCOTUS decisions. At NSF, our plan is to adhere to our values, our mission, our strategic goals, our imperative to create opportunities everywhere, and to ramp up our use of cross-sector partnerships to develop innovative solutions at speed and scale. There are many avenues and opportunities available for meaningful action to advance diversity and to do even more than ever before on equity. So today's panel of leaders will highlight the work that we are undertaking in our respective fields or could undertake collectively to catalyze systemic improvements to welcome and enable all STEM talent to thrive in this ecosystem. So we will save 25 minutes. I don't have a clock in my view, but I think you guys will help me out. Okay, all right. So, so we're gonna save 25 minutes or so for questions from the audience. If you're participating virtually, we've got the chat covered. We've got folks watching that, and we'll read out your questions. So please just put your questions in the chat. Importantly, as you listen, think about which initiatives are most conducive to building diverse, inclusive, and equitable STEM fields. Think about how does your organization identify and address its internal barriers? What strategies could best identify and remove barriers to attaining shared values and aligned aims across the STEM ecosystem? And what are the opportunities and challenges to collaborations toward those shared aims? So we will get started with our first question. Okay. So this is for any of the esteemed panelists. How has the gender and race DEI backlash wave affected the work of your organization, the work that you're doing to advance gender and racial equity, diversity, and inclusion in STEM fields? And what is your #1 priority initiative now? And when you answer this, also if you want to talk about how maybe it hasn't affected you directly, but maybe as we're focusing on partnerships. So we've got to partner with folks, and it's affecting, clearly it's affecting the ecosystem in many different places. So I don't know who would like to start. Don't make, you know, I went to Harvard Law School. We believe in the Socratic method. I can call on you.
I'm happy to jump in. I'm happy to jump in. Can you tell me if I'm okay? We're good. Okay. So hi, I'm Valerie Hughes Ashby, and I am president of UMBC. I laugh when you say that what I say is only my opinion. What day is that true? What day don't I represent UMBC if I have this pin on? It's one of the few days I don't have on actual black and gold, but I'm never confused that I am the university when I speak. And so the good news is that the university and I share values, so I don't have to hedge anything. So what I would say is the present environment has not really impacted our work. But let me tell you, I'll give a little nuance to that. Because the first line of our vision statement says that we're redefining excellence in higher education through an inclusive culture. Just think about what that means. That means we're going to decide when we are excellent on our own. Oof. And we have the privilege of actually doing that. So I don't take it for granted that we actually have the privilege of doing that. I happen to be in the state of Maryland. I chose wisely. I am in a public system that is very healthy, that is highly collaborative, very collegial. I have a boss who really is an advocate for DEI, and I did that on purpose. I chose this state, and I chose this job because we really can make a difference, and we're not hampered politically or otherwise. We still have, you know, political issues, but basically we put a stake in the ground that if we are not diverse, then we are not excellent, period. So that's been working for us for a while. And you heard my predecessor mention Freeman Hrabowski, who everybody knows. Freeman is an entity, right? But I so appreciate that that's the stake we put in the ground and we mean it. The challenge for us is to live it every day. And especially, we've done an incredible job in the undergraduate space, not perfect, but we've done an incredible job. We are not there. We're not the leader that we need to be in graduate education and in research. So as a new R1, that's my stake in the ground. We're going to be the R1 that really does research at an excellent level by being inclusive. And we're not going to, you know, give ourselves a pass because we might be 3 or 4 percentage points better than somebody else in another category. So that's where we are.
All right, thank you.
Well, maybe I'll go next just to kind of go down the line. That's okay. So the first thing I would say is, I'm really saddened by the backlash, but I'm not surprised. I was revisiting Susan Faludi's book from 1991, Backlash, the Undeclared War Against American Women. You may remember that book. Really interesting, a book of its time, but what is the dynamic that leads to these backlashes? And
Hi, honey.
it's progress.
I ended up coming home because a bunch of people couldn't come to the office today. So for various reasons, like I'm just going to do the rest of this from home.
Oh, I know that we have people who can help us mute.
Okay.
Are we all good? Okay, go ahead.
So I think that the fact of the backlash is already motivation to double down on what we believe and what we're doing. And that's not to be Pollyanna about it, but it really is the way I think about the place that we are. It's because we're having success, not enough success, but some success, that we get the pushback. So we're a private philanthropy. We're in a funny place in the ecosystem. I think each of us has to ask this question: where are we in the ecosystem? We run a university, we run a professional society, we're faculty. Wherever we are, we have something we can do. And I think Holden's gave a really great talk. And one of the things that I picked up from that and wanted to lift up is that no single person at any single place in this whole huge ecosystem can fix it. So we each ask, what is the thing we do? So as a philanthropy, actually the thing we do is not that we just spread money everywhere to fix the problem. We actually don't have enough money to do that. Maybe the Gates Foundation has enough money to do that, but the Sloan Foundation doesn't. But what we are able to do, both in the dedicated programs around diversity that Laurel Espinoza, who is here and you will hear from, leads, but also actually throughout all of the grant making we do, is think about how the grants that we make and the choices we make about to whom to make them can advance an equity agenda, right? And we have that freedom, right? I just have a board of trustees, and actually Freeman just retired from it, but it tells you the quality of the people that are on the board. They're urging us to make this, continue to make this a priority, and they are. We work through our grantees, right? So what we have the freedom to do is to choose people, institutions that are making change, that are already committed to making change, and to give them the resources to continue their work and to do that work in a way that can be exemplary for others. So I think that I would want to say that diversity and equity and inclusion, that continues to describe our approach. These are really great words. We got them defined for us again this morning. The people who oppose what we're doing can take any words and make them ugly. So I refuse to have diversity, equity, and inclusion be made into ugly words. On the other hand, we recognize that there are grantees who can't use them anymore. And so in our work with grantees, we're not going to be fussy about how you describe the work you do. We're not going to be fussy about the claims you publicly make about what you believe, but we are going to be very intent on what are you doing in whatever language your particular environment allows you to speak. What are you doing to advance these values that haven't changed for us and haven't changed for grantees? If there's a shift in what we're doing, I think it is to continue to particularly emphasize independent institutions that are not subject to some of the constraints that the DEI backlash is directly affecting. And I think the societies are a really important part of that. Sometimes I mean this in a half joking way. When I was a professor of physics, I didn't care. I kind of cared what my dean thought, my chair thought. I didn't really care what the dean thought. I really didn't care what the provost thought or the president thought. But I cared a lot what my colleagues in physics thought. And that the vector for change is our disciplinary colleagues, and that the work you're doing lives in a spot in the ecosystem where you can really make change. And so I think we're continually looking to partner with those who live in spots in the ecosystem where they can really make change. And that's the #1 priority that I'm going to point to.
Thank you. Dr. Croson?
Thanks. So I'll mention 2 very obvious issues that for all of us at institutes of higher education we're worried about. Of course, one is the recent Supreme Court decision around admissions and the potential spillover effects of that decision into scholarshiping, into programs for support for students that might include financial components, but aren't focused on that. And so we can talk all about how we and other AAUs and other Big Ten universities are adjusting. We are adjusting. And then the other, of course, is the model legislation that's working its way through so many states. Minnesota is a pretty purple state. And although our both houses and our governor is blue at the moment, we're very aware that that could change in a couple of years. And so one of the things that we're working on very consciously is trying to craft different messages for different audiences so that we can compellingly speak to the value of diversity, equity, inclusion activities that we are committed to doing, especially to audiences for whom that is not their orientation, who think that these are problematic in different ways. We're all pretty good at speaking to each other. It's really hard to speak to people with different political views. So I know there's a session all about this tomorrow at 1:15, so I don't want to steal any of that thunder. But I do want to give you some examples of the kinds of things that we're thinking about and testing out. So Therese mentioned the idea about developing talent, that we need to find the most talented people and develop them no matter what their background. That's a really great message for some audiences, resonates kind of well with the business community. maybe not so well for legislators, you know, kind of depends. I've had a lot of success with the what is the American dream kind of narrative, that the idea that our country was founded on this idea of equal opportunities, equal participation, inclusion historically, and that this is how we live that out today. Again, been effective with some audiences, less effective with others. Of course, there's a language around righting historical wrongs, right? And that there's been a historical challenge that needs to be addressed now. That resonates with a different audience. And so for us, kind of thinking again, not by ourselves, with our communications colleagues, with our other universities, with our other partners, about how we can convey the value and importance of what we want to do in a way that's going to be compelling to a broader swath of listeners than maybe we have in the past.
Dr. Jones?
Yeah, the wonderful thing about going last is I can just say ditto, right? And I will also say, because you heard NSF and AGU, I will be speaking on the AGU side. I have my AGU hat on today. And so I want to build on something Adam was talking about, that professional societies, unlike universities, have a unique role in the ecosystem. We can play a more substantive connective tissue role, where we can, interplay between universities, funding agencies, and other entities. And so here at AGU, we certainly are intentional about that through our strategic plan that you heard Janice mention, our CEO, where we have three main goals: science, obviously, collaboration, and inclusion. And inclusion is undergirded by our DEI committee and a very diverse council and a diverse board. And we have a governance process where there's input, including the staff. There's input from these three major portions of the society. So that's an inclusive process, but it's also one that elevates the value of so many different voices. And so we heard earlier about where valuing and a refocus or a rethinking about what is valuable and how we're going to measure that and how we're going to use that to build foundations. A couple of things that AGU is supporting that kind of fits in this space. Number one, the Thriving Earth Exchange that is AGU powered. I think it's close to 10 years old almost or so, Billy. Yeah, thank you. And if you're unaware of that, that's an effort that connects Earth space system scientists with the needs in communities that are facing all kinds of issues related to environment. And so we're really proud that we have that kind of program in place that is more on the applied science side. And so that is one of those areas that I see entrenchment from our traditional academics, that this applied notion of science versus the discovery basic research. So there's tension there, and that needs to be addressed. I'll also highlight that AGU for the science agencies was out in front with redefining scientific misconduct to include harassment and discrimination. So not just, the standard plagiarism and things of that nature. And we have a stellar ethics center with a policy in place and procedures in place that I think can be helpful for other institutions, other organizations to kind of look at as a way to deal with bad behaviors or bad actors or things of that nature. So I can go on and on, but I really want to get to these to the other questions. So I'll turn it back over to you, Sharice.
Okay, thank you. So we're all here from different sectors. What are the most promising opportunities for collaboration across the STEM sectors to maximize the potential for systemic change towards equity and inclusion?
I think I signed up for at least this question a little bit. So it's the ethical transparency tool has been mentioned. I've been very active in that space. You're going to hear more about that tomorrow. So I'm not going to talk about that example. I will talk about an example kind of from my history, which was a collaboration between the American Economic Association and the National Science Foundation. So the AEA requested an NSF funded a mentoring workshop for female junior faculty in economics. So it turns out the gender imbalance in economics is much significantly different than all the other social sciences, and even worse than many of the natural sciences. And there's data about that. We can talk about that other time. And so the question was, how are we going to address this? And so in 1998, there was a workshop for female junior faculty in economics to help them kind of get over the tenure hurdle. I was a participant in that workshop because I was a junior faculty member at the time, and it was totally transformative. It was, I mean, I can't even tell you how amazing it was. And, but it was a one-time deal. And so after I got tenure at Penn, I went back to the AEA and to the NSF and convinced them to restart and eventually institutionalize these workshops. And as part of that discussion, we did research. We used random assignment in assigning participants in and out of the workshop. We tracked their careers, we tracked their publications, and we demonstrated that participation in these kinds of supportive activities increased publication rates, increased your rate of grants, increased co-authorships. We had a whole set of measures that you care about in terms of academic advancement. So I think that is, and it served as a model. Those workshops are still going. It served as a model for other professional organizations. It served as a model even for other universities. So when I was a faculty member at UT Dallas, we started up a mentoring workshop for all junior faculty that was really based on some of these principles around peer-to-peer mentoring, around kind of, you know, intellectual exchange, around substantive engagement with the research. So it was a really wonderful kind of example. And I think there are things you can do like that that can lift up faculty who might be struggling with the hidden curriculum, who might not know things that are kind of obvious to other folks, that can really change the face of the society and of the profession.
Yes.
So I'd like to give an example too. I think one of the challenges of being leading a university or college is the incentives are not toward collaboration, right? You're asked by your board, did you beat them? Did you beat your rival? So when I was at Williams, you know, if I wanted to make the physics department better, my board was not interested in whether I collaborated with the Amherst physics department. It was are you better than the Amherst physics department? And one of the things you can do as a foundation is actually intervene in ways that foster collaboration between institutions that might not be used to thinking that they have anything in common. So I'm going to talk about a recent example coming out of Laurel Espinosa's program. And Laurel, if I get any of it wrong, you just wave. That we're really excited about over the last few years. I'll do this briefly, I promise. It's the Sloan Equitable Pathways program. And this is our partnerships between minority serving undergraduate institutions and graduate institutions to create pathways from the undergraduate study into graduate study. And these are typically undergraduate institutions that are not well-resourced, where there aren't the kind of resources in particular that allow students to always see naturally how they might pursue graduate study. And these are graduate institutions that would really like to have more diverse student bodies, but it's very specific. It's around a particular program, around a particular department. So the first thing is that these are both institutions that really want to do it. They came to us. We're not bribing anybody to do this work. The second, the MSIs include HBCUs, TCUs, Hispanic serving organization institutions. The graduate institutions, by contrast, are mostly PhD granting, does include some laboratories. We've made about $10 million in grants. We have about 40 grants, about 100 institutions are involved at this point. So what are we looking for? These grants support both institutions, and these really have to be partnerships, right? This cannot be a wealthy institution putting the name of, say, an HBCU on their grant to get Sloan money. These have to be real partnerships. And what we see is that there is a lot that these institutions can learn from each other. And the really successful grants are ones where the graduate institution really is learning from the faculty at the undergraduate institution. How do you teach this population of students? Who are they? What do they need? How can you mentor them? How do you teach them? And there's the information transfer has to be at least as much, probably more, toward the the graduate institution, it's not kind of noblesse oblige of the graduate institution giving some resources to a less resourced one. And these partnerships are powerful. They're powerful for the students, but they're also powerful for the faculty as we think about vectors that can change culture, right? Not just help individuals, but change culture. But this flow of ideas and respect that can come out of these connections, where people who in these graduate institutions who may not have thought a lot about the institutions they're partnering with before they're in this partnership, now see the enormous potential in a part of the ecosystem that they had not maybe understood that potential to be in before. So we think this kind of partnering within, but also within different parts of the sector is really important. The last thing I'll say is we've created a community of practice among the grantees. So this isn't in isolation. And we're just getting that launched. That is in collaboration with Sea Change at AAAS. So we are bringing in a third part of the sector in this now multi-part collaboration, and we're really, really excited about it. So I think that is the kind of thing no Supreme Court can tell us not to do that. No state can tell us not to do that. And those are the kinds of things we're looking for.
Very interesting. I know for me, I'm really interested in how you identify the authenticity of that proposed partnership at that proposal stage, particularly in the ecosystem where we exist now.
So, well, you send Laurel Espinosa to talk to them is what you do. But I think we look for a number of things. One is just simply the way they talk about the work. And then often there's an existing relationship of some kind. Maybe it's just a couple of faculty who have been working together that they build on. So the most successful of these are not made up out of whole cloth in response to the call for proposals, but grow out of something small where the people who already know each other see an opportunity to grow something larger.
Sure.
Yes. Yep.
Just chime in on that point, because I think the DEI has become big business. And a business can be regulated, but a movement cannot. And so this gets back to something that Shirley and Olin were saying. How do we create more of a movement for these collaborations that we're talking about in this space now where you can get a certificate in DEI from an Ivy League? So I don't even know what that means, but it's out there now. You pay this amount and you go through some online training and you got a DEI certificate. I mean, that's where we are. So it's been commodified, and we need to make sure that we're focusing on the why we're doing it and don't get caught up in the what and the how and such, because it's easy to get pulled down in there. And everything that's being said by my colleagues here, I would just say, we need to keep that in mind. And there's also this US Western flavor that is kind of sitting out there in what we're discussing too, and science is global, and we have to look at that as well.
You want to chime in?
I'm just trying to say on all of that around authenticity and who's in the game and why. I'm a big believer in using the lever that you have to pull. Right. So I can't pull the lever that Adam can pull, but I can pull the lever that I can pull. And leadership matters. I don't know if I've known that more than today. I mean, at this moment in time, leadership matters. So I'll give you an example. So my previous boss at Duke was Sally Kornbluth, she was provost when I was a dean. And by the way, my physics faculty did care what the dean thought. I don't know what you think. I held all the faculty lines. They did care. And I used them strategically. But that's not the point. The point was Sally was my boss when she was at Duke, and now she's the president at MIT. And I was at her inauguration, and boldly, as she should have said, she said, MIT is going to be the institution that solves climate change. I said, absolutely. Well, I mean, if you can't say that at MIT, I don't know what you're doing there, right? You got to believe that, right? So she put it out there. And so, and we're really close. We've been working together for 7 years. I went to her and I said, Sally, how are you going to do that when less than 10% of your faculty are people of color? You actually cannot do it with the people. She already knew this, right? This is the way we have talked to each other for 7 years. And so I said to her, you need UMBC and UMBC needs you. We produce more Black students in the sciences than any other institution in the country combined. And they go on to the best PhD and MD PhD and MD programs in the country. How are you going to do that if my scholars and scholars of color are not a part of the solution? You don't know the communities, you don't know the issues on the ground, and you're missing out on brilliant ideas. And she already knew this, right? We've come to that conclusion that without diversity, there is not access. That is a authentic collaboration where I trust her, she trusts me. I'm not worried about UMBC being the little guy that, you know, gets used, or, you know, some of these institutions are just looking for the next HBCU that they can find without any thought about the real relationship. So that's real, and leadership matters. I would not have been able to do that if she were not there, and she would have been able to do it, I'm sure, with Freeman, but the relationship that we have allows us to be able to really tackle something that is significant together.
That does make me think about one of the NSF examples that I wanted to bring up, a recent grant for a recent STC that is on braiding Indigenous knowledge and science. And it's at, I forgot to write down where, I think it's at Amherst. But essentially it's like a $30 million science and technology center, but it's all around connecting Indigenous knowledge with Western science to address these global challenges like climate change, land, water, animal life. But it's literally not possible without the partnership and infusing this very specific knowledge and experience and history of Indigenous people. So, okay. So what are the, I know we're not getting too much into the how and the why, but, you know, well, the why, yes, but maybe the how, but I have to talk a little bit about the how. Because honestly, you know, infrastructure, sometimes the infrastructure isn't really set up to support these partnerships. There are barriers, there are challenges. At NSF, our director loves to talk about partnerships all the time. So partnerships is always on my mind. But I know something I've seen is that there's like a hidden cost to partnerships. There's so many barriers. It costs so much. It takes a lot of time. And so can any of you jump in and just talk about either the kinds of infrastructure that maybe you've experienced that support partnerships, or what are the barriers to successful collaborations?
So maybe I'll start, but this is going to be pretty general. So I think something that Valerie said earlier about making sure you have a partner that has the same goals that you do, shares the same values, wants the same kinds of outcomes. And finding that partner can be a challenge. And even once you've found them, sometimes goals diverge and people change. I know the other challenge that I've found has to do with sometimes an inherent distrust of particular sectors and their motives. So we're in Minneapolis, St. Paul, you know, Minnesota has a bunch of Fortune 500 companies. Many of them are deeply concerned about their pipeline of workers. They want more diversity and equity and inclusion. And yet there's a lot of skepticism from some of my faculty about the benefits of partnering with a for-profit, private kind of entity. And so I think, you know, part of it is finding the right partner, but part of it is also overcoming maybe the biases or the inherent skepticism that people might have about the types of partners you're looking for.
Brandon?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of which one I was going to bring up here first. So, and I mentioned this entrenchment, this entrenchment of attitudes about applied science. And so we're talking about DEI. It's a human issue. We heard that earlier. And Earth and space scientists, I'll say, seem to think they know what to do, even though they're not trained in that. And when you suggest in different ways that they should be speaking with their social and behavioral and economic colleagues, there's an automatic devaluing of that expertise in their minds, that social science is not science. But, and we can lean on the traditional metrics of, I mentored 3 women graduate students and those kinds of things. And so, you know, when we're talking about building relationships with allies, I agree that we need to make sure those people are really doing the work, but also which allies in the system, I think this was brought up, do we use to be a lever? You know, where are we efficient in this? Because it's systemic. Are we efficient in the system at what we're trying to do in our partnerships versus stepping back and looking at which lever is really going to get us moving in a big and powerful way, which partnerships, which collaborations. So for example, which I think is going to be a big one, next week, AGU will be hosting for the first time the conference for the National Association of Black Geoscientists. So when we're talking about smaller societies that connect with the communities and are the gown to town idea, that that is a prime example of what can be done to ensure that, as I mentioned before, the connective tissue really has some undergirding and some intentionality in building the relationships. And relationships do take time, but I would offer that will is more important than time. We've been talking about DEI. I'll close with this. DEI has been a conversation for decades, and there was not a lot of movement. And then all of a sudden, George Floyd was murdered, and now so it wasn't time. Now, we don't want that kind of catalyst. So are we going to have the guts to create our own to move it forward?
I just want to add that was beautiful, and I didn't want to add. It's hard to speak after that because I think that's exactly right. But I do want to pick on something Rachel said, which is this is in this room a little bit of self-criticism. I don't think that we often think broadly enough about who can be allies, and I think because we have very precise things that we feel and say about these issues, our own language around inclusion is not always sufficiently inclusive. And I think particularly in this moment, looking for partnerships with partners who may not be perfect. You know, we may not be perfect partners for them either, but looking creatively for those and finding language that may not be the language we're used to for connecting to them and talking to them about some shared values that we can work together on, I think is really important. And I think we need to be more creative, and we need to be a little more open-minded as a community than sometimes we are about what can look like a productive partnership. We don't have to partner on everything to get something really good done. And I would encourage us to think that way as much as we can.
So I'm hearing leadership matters, and will is the most important thing, more important than time. I'm hearing identifying the right partners, the right allies, maybe in places we haven't looked or language we haven't used. I want to bring it back to the Harvard and UNC cases, only in that, in terms of even the climate that they've created. Because how do you do that when there are so many people who don't even want to speak right now?
So I'll come back to the leadership matters question, because the leaders need to speak. And speaking is what you have to do. That's why you're in the role. That's why they pay you the big bucks. Not so big when you're in university, but that's okay. That's why that you're there. And so that's important. But as I said before, speaking to the right audience, using the right, not just the right words, but the right constructs, tapping into the values that you share and identifying how when you are taking these actions, you're advancing those shared values is really going to be important and pivotal. But in addition, we can't forget that we're also speaking to our students, even when we're speaking to our legislators or our parents or whatever that happens to be. So at Minnesota, we had 3 optional questions in our application process. One of those was already in place about how you contribute to the diversity broadly defined of the university. And we made that question required in this year's application. So, you know, we did all the other things to make sure we were compliant with the new interpretation of law, and we are, and I can say that on record, and I've said that on record before, but we are also committed to our diversity, equity, inclusion goals. And so this was one way that we signal that commitment. Again, not only to our partners, but also to our incoming students and to our students who are there already, who, believe me, notice when you make those kinds of changes. So I think, you know, leadership needs to speak, and you need to speak in ways that are that will be received by all of the audiences that you need to communicate with.
And I would just jump right in behind that and just say, yes, absolutely. One of the things that I am enjoying in Maryland is that I actually get to use I will use my voice wherever it is. Holden Thorpe taught me a long time ago, hold on to your values much more tightly than you need a job or a title, because you may have to let it go. And everywhere I've been willing to quit my job. I just, to this day, I'm willing to quit my job. Now that's a privilege. I get that. But because I have the privilege, I'm willing to quit my job. Having said that, I also feel like the universities in particularly public institutions, particularly publics and private, publics in states where you can speak and privates anywhere almost, have an obligation to speak up. Because I know I have colleagues in other places that would love to say the words that I am saying, but they cannot, for all the reasons that Holden said. And so I feel everywhere I go, it's the University System of Maryland and everybody else who has a voice that they can use without their mission being threatened, has to use it. I've got to say words for my colleagues at UNC Chapel Hill for sure. My goodness. Because I don't have a risk, but if I had one, I think you got to step into leadership. People who tell me they want to lead an institution, they want to be an academic leader. I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure? Because you may have to quit your job, or somebody could be doing something right now in Maryland where I go back and I don't have a job. Like, that's the risk. But it's so worth it because you can use your voice. And when you're leading, I agree, will is a thing. It's like when people tell me the rules, I'm like, who made the rules? Okay, well, if that's not legal, if it's not, then we make the rules, that we just do it. And so there is some courage here that I have learned from my dear colleague Holden Thorpe. I mean, that there's some courage that it takes to do this. And also, you when you have privilege, you just have to be willing to do more than everybody else.
Yes.
So now I want to channel Jamie a little bit in what I want to say, which is that, so the Sloan Foundation, I feel like I'm in a meeting with Jamie Lewis Keith every other week. And I'm learning a lot about the law, but about how to think about this moment. And you know, you said it, but I want to take 30 seconds and just say it again. We have to treat this moment as an opportunity to be better. And you know, that's not to say that what the Supreme Court ruled wasn't wrong and stupid and destructive. Of course it was, but it's the law, and we're going to figure out what the law is, and we're going to live within it, and then we're going to do everything we can in that very large space that it allows to move this agenda forward. And I think that's a role of the Sloan Foundation. I mean, one of the reasons I see Jamie is that every organization we work with seems to want to hire education counsel to bring really good advice to their community about how to navigate this. And every time an organization comes to us and says, do that, we say that's an excellent idea. Because the kind of framework that you saw this morning and that you see every time the folks from Ed Council, Art and Jamie and Ed and their colleagues talk, is forward looking. And if in these moments, we have to be really forward looking. So the role of the foundation, of the Sloan Foundation, is to not just by working with Ed Council, but in all of our grant making, to try to work with institutions to figure out what they can do, not mourn what we can't do. And there are models. We have a program, graduate education in STEM. We've been working with schools in California for a long time in this. They've lived under a legal regime where they couldn't take race into account admission and found a way to do it. So how do we take models like that and propagate them? So I think the answer to your question is, let's look forward and figure out what we can do. We're still have enormous freedom compared to many other countries and many other places. So let's use it.
Okay. So this seems like a great time to invite questions from the audience.
All right, so similar to last time, we're going to do one in person, then switch to virtual. So I see Joanne has a question.
Thank you. Joanne Kamens from AWIS, I guess, for this purpose. That was so inspiring to hear you speaking. I can't even tell you. I'm suffering from DEI fatigue after 30 years of doing this, so thank you. Really can't say enough. My concern is around these fantastic collaborative programs. So aside from economics, apparently, women have been making strides in my field area originally, which is the life sciences, the numbers, for 30 years. I mean, my graduate school 30 years ago was 50-50 women and men. We had a very binary description then, so that would not be the case now. But I would say what concerns me now is what are the organizations, all of your organizations, especially granting agencies, doing to ensure that when those students make the next step, that they're not suffering really serious harassment and bullying, which I know is still going on for a variety of reasons I won't go into now firsthand. I speak to hundreds of women every year who are suffering from these things, particularly women in the case of my organization. So I'm really excited about what you said and really feeling better, but also really worried about inclusion and the firsthand individual stories of how are we going to change that next level so they can get where we need them to go? Because we must have diversity in all these places. So that's my question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Dr.
so yes, all right, so that's very, very important. And I think what I would start, I'll be brief, but I would start by saying that we're interested foundationally in systemic change in institutions. And certainly we help individual students. That's very important. We're thrilled we do it. We follow them. We love them. They're associated with Sloan for 20 years. But the real goal is systemic change. And so in all of our programs, particularly those that within the higher ed programs, our university centers for exemplary mentoring, our Sloan systemic change new program that's coming up, these equitable pathways programs, we're not just looking for what are you going to do for individual students in terms of their financial help or their advising, but what is the mentorship culture in the institution in which they are going to be going? So in our USEMs, our University Centers for Exemplary Mentoring, we gave parts of those grants are to create resources that allow faculty to take the best of what's known about good mentoring and bring it into their institutions. One of the most important things in these equitable pathways collaborations that the people in the graduate institution can learn is how to, from the undergraduate institution, is how to be effective mentors of those students. Now, effective mentoring is much larger, of course, than what you're talking about, which is just not doing terrible things. But I think the kind of, and that's a low bar, right? The bar is higher than that. But I think the way we think about it is a very important component in getting over that bar is larger change in the cultures of the institutions in which all of the students are doing their work.
And I want to add an NSF point too, that a lot of people I think don't know is happening, but our next version of our PAPG is going to require mentoring plans for graduate students. So everyone can look it up. It's been, it was published in the draft version that came out. It will launch, I believe, in January, like it always does. So that's a huge change. We've had the postdoc mentoring requirement in place for a while, but this will now reverberate because it will be for graduate students. Brandon?
And just a quickly add to what Adam was saying, and this is building on Rachel and Valerie's idea of supporting faculty. So AGU has a program called Landing, and it's about creating DEI champions in that faculty space. So yes, we want the students to come in. We do want institutional change, but we need individuals there in that connective space. I like that word, right? That yes, are mentoring effectively, but also can be in places where decisions are being made. So I can go to a bank and take all the loan officers and give them diversity training and they understand. But if redlining is still a policy and those loan officers aren't in the rooms where they can say, no, we're not going to do this, then where's the change? It's going to be slow, if at all. But with a program like Landing and some of what you heard from Valerie and Rachel in institutions, we can start to build all the support that's needed across the full ecosystem for talent development.
When I think about just that point, at a university, the decision that the place where the culture is created is in the departments. I don't create culture. Now I try to set a vision of culture, but I'm not deep in the daily engagement in a department. And sometimes it's even within a subsection of a department, but it's certainly at the departmental level. So for me, in my previous role as a dean, my job was to make sure I had a great chair in every department. And great to me meant they understood what we're talking about here, and then were willing to help their faculty move through that. And most of the time it's not mentoring. Well, it is mentoring the faculty who are coming through, but it's actually helping the other faculty. My problem is not the people who are trying to get tenure, it's the other folk. So having a great chair, but that means, again, it's a leadership thing. A chair in a department can change the game. It's amazing how powerful that is. And so when I look across my STEM units and I see how many women, how many people of color, it's a game changer. As soon as, I'll give you an example here at UMBC, we have a woman who is chairing information systems. One of our biggest departments in our College of Engineering, game changer. As soon as she stepped in that role, game changer. The conversations they're having, the conversations, by the way, that they are no longer having. Amazing for the role model for the graduate students, the different way she's paid attention to diversity and mentoring. Leadership really does matter. And well, well, okay, there are a lot of people who are doing this work, right? And we all need to do it in our, again, pull the lever that you have. Right. So yeah.
Is there a question from the virtual space?
Sure. Greetings, everyone. Ed Smith at Council, just surfacing a virtual question. There are plenty of reaffirmations of the sentiments and ideas you brought forth, but just noting one question about authenticity versus accountability in the partnerships that you all have described. One participant is wondering if maybe some of you can outline what an ecosystem accountability metric may look like to foster some of the partnerships that you all described, where it's inclusive, effective, the roles are clear, and everyone is moving forward in this work. Thanks.
Great question.
So when I think of accountability, I think of learning outcomes, right? I think of starting with the end in mind. So I think the way to get to successful accountability is for everybody to start off by agreeing what we're trying to achieve together, and then to create measures, whatever they happen to be, and to agree on those measures at the beginning of what would the world look like if we were successful, and how would we know? So I think that so in my mind, accountability stems from that authenticity, stems from the authentic agreement and alignment that the parties have, and needs to go beyond actor by actor accountability. So I can do my part and you can do your part and they can do their part, and we can still not achieve the end goal. So that definition of what is the outcome that we want to see needs to be about outcomes, not about actions. And it needs to be about collective outcomes.
I just so love what I just heard. I love that because often you ask them, what are you doing in DEI? And they will tell you 5,000 actions. And I ask them, so tell me about the diversity of your faculty. it's the same as it was 15 years ago. And I appreciate the actions, but the accountability is at a systemic change level. So I so appreciate that.
Yes, accountability. So one thing I will say is we can't have that discussion without talking about data, you know, and often we don't know, actually. I mean, at NSF, we fund grants, it's financial assistance. I mean, we are nod to the right direction, but we don't get in there. And so I will say that there is more and more of a look at evaluation and just looking at that data. And so I think there's a lot more, you know, that is to come on that. I don't think we're necessarily there yet. But I think it's a great question, and we're very interested because I know we want to be effective, whether it's intellectual merit or broadening participation. Is there a question in the room?
Hi, yeah, Marsha Lesky with Optica. And you had talked about a little bit challenges in creating these types of partnerships that we're discussing. But what about going sort of the next step beyond that in challenges in communicating these types of opportunities to a wider audience? You know, and I think we represent a bunch of different professional societies or scientific societies, and a lot of us are working in very kind of stovepipe situations, and being able to communicate to our members these types of opportunities, but also have our opportunities communicated out into the work that you all are doing or the work that everyone else is doing in this room. How do we do a better job of that?
Well, you see, you stumped us. Well, I'll speak for myself. You stumped me. The people that, so to Rachel's point about co-creating upfront, we have to be thoughtful and intentional about having, we say different voices, and then what does that mean? We need to define what voices means, and to have individuals who are able to walk in multiple worlds and translate across organizational cultures and customs, so that opportunities can be presented in a way that, as I think Rachel mentioned before, that can be received by the target community. But that starts with the why and figuring out what your outcomes are going to be before you get into designing activities and tasks and things of that nature. I know I'm talking all around it because I really don't have an answer. I mean, that's that communication and dissemination of information is key and critical. And it's going to take more. Perfect place for inclusion and diversity, to have people in the room when that's being designed on how to communicate. Yeah.
Okay, we are nearing the end. So do we have any other questions okay, let's have a question here.
Well, it was more of a comment than a question, although it relates to the last question. I want to go back to your question or offer a suggestion about the issue of data. As important as investment in primary research is, and as important as evaluation is, as well as we innovate in these ways, there are two major assets, at least, in each of your agencies: NCSES, National Center for Education Statistics, and NCES at the Department of Education. And the equity agenda that Alondra Nelson really pushed during her time at OSTP really sought to merge and fuse issues of equity and excellence. And I think that provides an opportunity to step back across agencies. There's a lot of pressure that each agency respond to what they're doing, but the statistical agencies that are also reflecting on this need to kind of merge with those of you who are driving and leading the science programs at our key science agencies. I was at NSF for 12 years, so I know the beauty of the science agencies, but we need to partner also with the statistical agencies within the science agencies. So I throw that out as one working recommendation. I will add one thing, and I'm sure Valerie feels the same way, but being in an institution of higher education where I get to interact with our students and the next generation of scientists every day, I am hopeful. I mean, this generation, they care about these issues. They care enough to change their actions. They care enough to leave their jobs. They care enough to do things that are personally costly to make, to change the world, to be a more just place. And they, you know, they protest on our campuses, they challenge us, they do all the kinds of things that they should be doing. And they make me hopeful about all the work that we're doing together now.
So
oh, go ahead.
I'm going to use my prerogative for
Yeah.
2 seconds to just say that let's not fail to see what's in front of us, what's right in front of us, which is that there is a power in having a collective. And it's not, and I'm not thinking of it even of just this collective of societies that are members, but I'm thinking actually, Rachel, of the collective effort that went on for 3.5 years or more to create a tool that could actually create more welcoming and inclusive climates across the ecosystem that we'll hear about more tomorrow. And that was really something that involved higher education, societies, and some organizations. And I think that let's maximize the efforts that all of the sectors have put in, and the opportunities that maybe lift up some of those models. Yep. where the collective has actually worked.
Yep, I know I certainly have been at the National Science Foundation for many years, decades, actually. And the entire time we've been talking about this. That's how I first met Shirley. And we've heard that it's not one sector's responsibility. It really is the collective and how we can work together. It is exhausting. To the audience member who said this work can be exhausting. I know I left for a little while and I came back and I was like, oh my gosh, it's like a soap opera. We come back and nothing's changed. But all kidding aside, because it's really not funny. I will ask us to end on thinking about what the societal cost is of not doing this work, not winning, not cracking this nut, not defanging, as we've been calling it, this DEI backlash wave. And I say that, and any of you can comment, but just also thinking about the homework that we did, you know, the SCOTUS decision, as it is what it is, but it's really just about limiting a tool and these design parameters. But the thing about the state legislation is really going after the goal in and of itself, you know? And so as we close out, I'd really like to hear some concluding thoughts on just the societal cost of getting this right.
I get to go first this time. Okay. The societal cost is that humanity will never reach its full potential to address all kinds of issues. And then it plays out in New Orleans or Houston when there's a hurricane, or Maui when indigenous knowledge was not incorporated in decision-making about clearing brush and forest, and then the wildfires showed up and the hurricane acted like a bellows off the coast. It ends up in Libya that wipes out whole towns. That's the cost. And I'm just on the climate part, right? But any sector, any issue that we're dealing with, if you have a limited perspective, it's just not going to work because it goes against natural law. Monocultures don't exist in nature for a reason. Because if everything is the same, when the calamity hits, everything is gone. So the power of diversity is the power of resiliency. So that's the cost.
I don't know how to follow that.
I know.
Yes. I will also say one of the things that keeps me up at night is this idea that we're going to end up as two separate countries. that we're gonna have some places where everyone is welcome and included, and we're leveraging the talents of everybody, and economic and social justice and inequities are reducing. And then we're gonna have the rest of the nation. And that's not good for us as a nation, and I think it's not good for the world either. And so that's why I'm so focused on kind of trying to communicate with people who might not share our views, because I think that that's what's going to be required in order to avoid that sort of dystopian future.
So I'm going to try to be uplifting. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I think a lot of countries going backwards at the moment with respect to the values we're talking about here. And I don't want us to be, the United States to be one of them, continue to be one of them. I believe that in the long run, we're going to get to the future that we want, but the long run can be a long way away. And between now and the long run, there can be a lot of suffering. And my sense of urgency comes from the fact that in the short and medium run, people are going to get hurt by what's happening. And so let's get to work.
I don't know that I have much to add, except for the joy for me every day is to wake up and to produce young people who get it. They are, I love what Holden said about protesters. I love it when they protest. I love it. I'm like, you care about something. You care about, usually they're protesting not for themselves. Even if it impacts them, sometimes they are protesting for people. They're sometimes protesting for my housekeepers, you know. I love that. Right. This is a group of young people that actually cares about something that's bigger than themselves. Don't believe the hype about young people. Right? Yes, they're in social media and doing all kinds of crazy things, but when I tell you they care deeply about humanity, I mean, I have student office hours. It's the best part of my week. I had 4 students in a predominantly white male fraternity, one African-American male sitting in front of me, talking to me about these issues, about how they want their fraternity to be a place that makes a difference on campus. Like, this is who we're sending out into the world. And every year we go to graduation, we send out thousands more. So I am not in any way, I mean, it's a big deal, right? But I wake up every day with pure joy knowing that we are producing world changers. They are, if you've got young people, you know what I'm talking about. They can't figure out how to balance a checkbook, but they want to change the world.
Amen.
I mean, my 27-year-old, I'm still trying to get her to balance the checkbook, but she wants the world to be different. So this is what we're doing. Like, this is the business we're in, which is why it's worth every battle we have to fight. And for all the reasons that you have said. So, yeah.
Dr. Brandon Jones, Dr. Rachel Croson, Dr. Adam Belk, and Dr. Valerie Shears Ashby. Thank you. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Let's thank our audience. This has been remarkable. We're energized and uplifted. Thank you.
And thank you to Sharice for moderating.
Okay, so I'm turning it back over to you.
Thank you again for all of our wonderful panelists and our moderators. Now that we're all energized, it's now to turn to breakout sessions. So we are going to have both in-person and virtual breakout sessions this year. And so up on the screen is just our breakout segment, inclusive norms. Participation is encouraged but not required. Practice courtesy, share the air, and respect others. There will be no recording. Who says what stays in the room, but the learning leaves. And for those of you who are on video, it is optional, so please don't comment on whether someone chooses to keep their video on or off. So we will have 3 breakout sessions, all of which are offered virtual and in person. The first being continuing the plenary conversation, society and ecosystem-wide issues and actions to defang DEI. If we could go to the next slide, please. Teaching the teacher, expert-led facilitation coaching for difficult conversations on gender, race, harassment, and then 3, surviving the DEI backlash, well-being, and mutual support to push back and thrive in STEM. So for those who are in person right now, these are the locations for the in-person. The continuing the plenary conversation will be in the Lunar Room, which will be over here. So if you are in that room, in that breakout, you can stay in this room. Teaching the teacher is in Third Rock LL3. That is on the lower level. So if you exit this room, make a right, go through the lobby. There is a staircase that will lead you down there. It is also accessible via elevator. And then surviving the DEI backlash is in the member lounge lobby. So right out the door here, there's 2 tables. If you don't remember your breakout assignment, that's okay. It happens. It's available in your participant materials linked in there. So you're able, if you don't have access to those via your laptop or your phone, just come to me and I can confirm which breakout session you're in. If you go to the next slide, these are for our virtual participants, the virtual rooms. All of the breakout sessions have been pre-assigned for our virtual participants. If you joined late, registered late, you might not be assigned to one automatically, but we have it in the participant materials guide, and it should also be linked in the chat for you to see your virtual breakout group. So we will all reconvene after the breakout groups at 3:10. We'll, after the breakout groups, go to a 15-minute break for coffee, tea, other beverages, and we encourage you to reconvene in the main hall after. So any questions before we let you all break? Yep, so after we then come back after breakouts and after break, we will have the final panel on early career voices, which we will be joined by Dr. Kale from FASIP, Dr. Jemison from ACS, and Dr. West from GW, and moderated by our host, Philly Williams from AGU. So enjoy your breakout sessions. Thanks all.
Minute. So I'm excited to introduce the next next session and our panelists on meeting the needs and cultivating leadership amongst early career professionals and graduate students. And again, my name is Billy Williams. I'm on the staff here at AGU. So these students, and this morning, some people call them the young people who get it, and I'm adding in young people who are doing it. And we're very, very fortunate to have our panelists here today, 1 in person, and I'll introduce them as we go forward, and 2 online virtually. And in fact, you may have noticed that during the whole course today, we've had about equal distribution of about 60 people in the room and another 60 or so online. So I'm glad we could do a hybrid meeting this year. But these early career professionals and graduate students are intellectual. They are the intellectual innovation and leadership future of STEM fields. They affect our democracy and workforce, the global economy, and the health of all life on the planet. And so with all of us, they will help drive our field towards equity, diversity, and inclusion as needed for excellence and integrity in STEM. So first, I will, Dr. Vijay Karle is online here. He's a principal scientist and project toxicologist at Bristol Myers Squibb. He's also the chair of FASIP's Early Careers Engagement Task Force and the former Early Career Research Representatives on the FASIP Board of Directors. For those of you who may not know, FASIP is acronym for the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology. Also online is Dr. Raquel Jamison. She is a chemist and she is program manager in the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Project at the American Chemical Society. So good to see another chemist here. I still claim that. Dr. Jemison is passionate about improving underrepresented minorities' access to STEM fields. And in the room here with us today is Dr. Jordan Shelby West. And Dr. West is the Associate Vice Provost for Diversity, Equity, and Community Engagement at the George Washington University here in Washington, D.C. Dr. West also has a faculty appointment in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at GW and teaches courses on Black feminist theory. So just a few more words of context before we get into this. And I will ask is that when I introduce when we lead with the panelists for them, they could say a few more words about themselves and anything else they want to lead in with. So efforts to empower early career professionals and graduate students, particularly those from intersected, marginalized gender and racial communities, are critically important to the future and vitality of our STEM ecosystem. You've heard some of that today. And again, the panelists this morning referred to being encouraged by what they see in some of our student and early career members. This belief is the impetus for one of the priority goals of this consortium strategic plan. And it reflects a theme in our work plan, including not only being part of this fifth year convening, but also we've had a recent chat and collaborative session in the consortium over the past year. And we also have an executive subgroup that is working to identify leadership opportunities for early career professionals within our structure and activities to support our members in their own efforts. So this panel will discuss how to build equitable, diverse, and inclusive leadership systems that enable all people, particularly people with marginalized gender and racial identities, to see themselves as having agency and influence in the STEM fields, starting with the earliest stages of career. We will explore how the consortium societies and other sectors of the STEM ecosystem can expand viable pathways to leadership in STEM that are ethical, inclusive, and reaffirming. And VJ, we will look forward to hearing from you about key recommendations from FACET's recently published Early Career Representative Engagement Task Force report. I think that was a key report. And Raquel, we look forward to hearing about using an asset-based lens to avoid falling into a trap of focusing specifically on activities and programs that are oriented around too narrow definitions of professional development opportunities. And relatedly, Jordan, we look forward to hearing about ways to systematically foster inclusion so that those with marginalized gender and racial identities can thrive, translating insights from your campus and consulting work into strategies and action steps for societies and institutions to monitor. So with that, let me open the discussion by starting with you, VJ. So I'll ask each panelist, starting with you, VJ, then Raquel, and then you, Jordan, is that same question. And this is a basic question. Why is it important to increase the representation of early career professionals and graduate students in STEM leadership in professional societies and in fields, especially those from marginalized gender and racial communities? So VJ, you want to just take a shot at that?
Sure. And first of all, thank you, Billy, for inviting me on this panel. Really appreciate it. So having the early career scientists and especially the marginalized communities on the, having their equal say on any council or any task force or any committee is very important. One of the reasons is that the problems that group faces, they only can represent themselves and they only can be a good advocate for themselves. So it is best to have their opinion, their thoughts, and their ideas, how the system can be improved to accommodate their needs. So who else can be a better voice than themselves? So that's why like, I think having that group in the discussions and in the when we talk about the future, because the early career scientist is the future. So having that group representatives and especially marginalized communities is critical.
Thank you, Vijay. Raquel.
Yes. And thank you again for the invitation. It was my intention to be there in person today, but in work travel, I fell ill. So to keep my germs to myself, I'm staying at home. So in terms of why it's important for us to increase representation of our early career professionals, I think one piece we need to keep in mind is that our generations keep changing. Right. So whereas previous generations may have seen huge value in identifying as part of a society or an association, we're increasingly in an environment where it is harder to justify spending money on membership fees, justifying to immediate management why you should be out at the conferences, especially if you're not in spaces such as academia or places where research is highly valued. The other reason is we need to be cognizant of the fact that our youngest generations are the most diverse generations in the United States that we've had to date. If we don't make changes to the way that we interact with each other and the ways that we make space for our incoming youngest generation, we risk losing our future membership and the future livelihoods of our associations and societies. So it is our responsibility to create a space where anyone, regardless of their background, regardless of gender, socioeconomic backgrounds, LGBTQ plus membership to the community, disability status, what have you, everyone should be able to have an ability not just to participate, but should be able to see and envision themselves as part of the membership, part of the leadership, part of this decision makers, and being able to make strategic decisions in the future for a society. There's a lot that the American Chemical Society has done that has been in line with many of the recommendations that has come out in the FASB report, be it the creation of affinity-based committees. For example, our Younger Chemist Committee is going to be celebrating its 50th anniversary next year. We have ongoing partnerships with organizations such as the National Organization of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers, which I think, and personally, I'm a student of Nobuche, I'd say, growing up, having that dual membership with both ACS and Nobuche allowed me a space where I could be all of myself with Nobuche and connect with my fellow chemists, but also, enjoy having a Soul Train line at the end of the conference as well. And then I have my experience with ACS as well, where I can continue to work on my publishing and become a contributor within science. So there's a number of things that us within our societies and organizations, a number of responsibilities that we have to create space and some creative ways that we can do that as well.
Yeah, thank you for that and making it personal and also just bringing it home to it being sort of, we don't do this well, the future of our own professional societies is at stake here, at risk here. So.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to share space with you today. I think for me, I go initially to what data tells us about bias. So several of you are familiar, if not all of you, with the American Red Cross. And about 10 years ago, they came out with a promotion on pool safety. And as you can imagine, American Red Cross, large organization, it probably got vetted through a lot of people. And when this promotion came out, what it showed was that all the negative behavior around pool safety was being pointed toward folks who were darker in complexion in this promotion. Those who were doing good things, if you will, were lighter. Now, it went through a lot of people. And as soon as it went out, it came down. You can still Google it and find it. But American Red Cross quickly came out and addressed that they put this through their entire board, and board is ambiguous, but folks in leadership who have decision-making power, and nobody noticed this. And what it tells us is that you can have a lot of well-intended people in the room who come from a homogenous background and will make decisions that not only cause harm, but perpetuate stereotypes and actually trigger, affect, and create an unhealthy environment for many folks of color in this case. And so if we know that bias exists, and even as a well-intended person, you could make a decision that has a negative impact, we have to then diversify our decision-making spaces. We have to diversify any table, literally and figuratively, where conversations are happening about humans, about science, about research. The other thing I think about is that we know through actually American University just down the road, their School of Education and many other scholars there do a significant amount of research on the fact that when students, and I know I'm taking it out of maybe this scope of conversation, but when students across all identities at every age are taught by folks of color, they are all going to benefit from the learning environment. Now, we don't have that same data when folks are taught by white people. It doesn't mean that white people teaching don't teach well. It means that the data does not show an overwhelmingly positive experience when the teacher is always white. And so if students have more than 2 folks of color, particularly Black folks, teaching them in their duration of their K through 12, they are more likely to have a positive experience going forward with education as a whole and complete degrees. It's data, it's out there. You probably love data. And so these are things that tell us that regardless of our feelings, our opinions, well-intended efforts, that there are things that still influence us to make decisions that may not be so great. But if we bring folks to the table with lived experiences who represent a variety of people, we are less likely to cause harm and less likely to make decisions that are exclusive. And so as organizations, as boards, as people in leadership outside of even this room, you make decisions that influence money, who gets rewarded, who gets awarded, what research, what data, what scholars you amplify. And if we think back to that American Red Cross example, if we're all making decisions about who we amplify and we all come from a similar background, we're likely to amplify somebody who looks like us, not because that's what we think is right or wrong, but it's because of what we do. I also think that it's very common to do research about communities that are historically marginalized and not do research with communities that are historically marginalized. And we have this phrase now that's more common, community engaged research and participation. And we're oftentimes surveying people, asking people, picking at people, but not inviting them to be at the table around what research looks like, should look like, and who should involve. And I think I'll just say, it's important that we understand when we create opportunities for people to be in boards, in the room, in associations, we're creating access that is a retention effort. So you have maybe faculty or scholars or people in your community and organizations who, when you give them an opportunity, they are more likely to stay and probably give back even more significantly. And so when we think about access to a table, it's more than just having a voice and more than just having representation, but it is a pipeline to retaining a particular person or people. And as a woman of color, as a Black woman, I know that when I see people who look like me in positions of power, power is ambiguous, but power as in maybe decision-making or a position higher than I'm in, I believe that a pathway has been created. And so if we care to diversify, and when we say diversify, that word has lots of meaning to people, but I'm thinking about bringing folks of color to the table, specifically Black and brown people, bringing queer people, bringing trans folks to the table, then we need to be sure that we are putting people in those places so that other folks behind them, if you will, understand that that is an opportunity and a place where they can be. So you have to create the possibility, not just wait for somebody else to do it.
Thank you, Jordan. That was rich. A lot of threads there we can pull on any one of those, but thank you so much. So I'm going to turn to VJ now, because VJ, you were, I think you may have headed it, but you were part of the FACET group who produced the early career report. Can you hear what some of the salient findings, anything you think this audience might want to hear from that early career committee work at FACET, please?
Absolutely, Billy. So this committee work, from this work, we got, very good themes where we can address. So purpose of this task force was to identify the needs of the early career scientists in the United States that societies can accommodate. And we came up with 5 themes. We basically, this task force surveyed like more than 500 folks and interviewed I think 14 members across different diversities representing different groups. So we came up with 5 themes. So one of the first theme was like networks and mentors. So what does it mean is that the societies can create an opportunities for the early career scientist to network with other people, whether it is peer or whether it is a senior scientist in the society, and also availing the mentoring opportunities for the early career scientists. So there should be some platform that society can provide to the early career scientist. So second theme was the career exploration and career transition readiness. So from this survey, we found that like many students, they are they want to make a career transition, but they don't know how to do it and what are the career options there. So I think like societies can be a best place for such guiding the students or postdocs or early career scientists to show them like what are different career prospects are available there apart from academia, or even like other than other conventional opportunities. So that was one of the second theme that came out. And third one was to have the safe and inclusive environment. Now this is important because the perceived safety also sometimes can be a can facilitate or perceived unsafe environment, work environment can also hinder the participation of the participation of the diverse workforce. So the recommendation was that like for the societies to create a programming or certain awards to promote the inclusivity in the environment in the scientific ecosystem, particularly within the society, and strive for the diversity. The society should come forward and say that we want to have the diversity. It is not just to say, but act, show that, And as Raquel mentioned, affinity-based groups. So this was something I personally experienced in my early career. Still, I'm in early career, but this has been very helpful. Like in Society of Toxicology, there are different affinity-based groups. We call social interest group there. And the good thing is that in those special interest groups or affinity-based groups, I could connect with the people who has traveled the same path like me, and they can guide me what are the hurdles out there and how I can overcome those. So I think that was the biggest support for me in my initial few years of career. And still I rely on that support group still now. And now being member of that group, I pay back. So it is a very, very, very important and very effective way. And that can be, women in toxicology, for example, or women in science, or, African, Hispanic, or any, you name it. Like there are different, there can be different affinity-based groups. So that was one of the recommendation. Fourth one was, supporting the international scientists. So international scientists, they often contribute to these, scientific upliftment in general. And many of those ultimately end up in US and contribute to the science in the US. So the members, the society's members who are, from the international academics, so they have different issues. They have different challenges, which probably it is very difficult to understand from being in the US, because those can be we cannot think of those challenges. So that is one. And final theme was the society structure and governance, to give the space for the early career representative in the society's council, like decision making body. So those are the 5 main themes to brief.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you also for highlighting the needs of international student and early career international scientists as well. Many of our organizations represented here have international membership, and often when we talk about these issues, we talk about it from a U.S. perspective, and some of that was pointed out this morning, the need to approach these issues with a global mindset. So I'm going to pivot back because you talked about your experiences and the benefits you derived from being part of an affinity group. That was one of the recommendations from the FACET committee report. And then, so I'm going to pivot back to you, Raquel, because you started off talking about some of your experiences in Novache, for example. So the question is this: reflecting on your experiences, how can we create win-win leadership development experiences in professional societies and possibly the consortium here for graduate students and early career professionals that also contribute meaningfully to the society and the field? Are there any specific strategies you could recommend to society leaders and any pitfalls to avoid? You can talk from your own experiences or whatever you would have here. And Jordan, the same question is coming to you next. Okay?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that I am extremely proud of with the American Chemical Society are the partnerships that we've developed, not only with Novache, the National Organization of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers, but also with ACES, our American Indian Science and Engineering Society, and with SACNIS, the Society for Advancing Chicanos, Hispanics, Native Americans in Science. Those partnerships have been going for decades at this point. Do not ask me for the exact number of years, but those are relationships that have been developed with the intent of making sure that the American Chemical Society can provide support where it is wanted from those organizations. And I'll say that's the pitfall to avoid in terms of assuming that you, as maybe a majority representing organization, already know what it is that another organization may need. Especially if they're smaller or may have fewer financial resources and things of that nature. But one of the things that we like to focus on is how can we mutually support each other and ideally create a win-win-win leadership development opportunity, right? So something where the American Chemical Society is able to learn how to better work and develop young scientists from backgrounds that may not align with the majority of our membership. Organizations like SACNIS, Novache, or ACES may be able to benefit from some of the resources that ACS has. ACS puts on huge conferences twice a year, every year, and they are huge conferences. So there are occasions where we can provide advisement, recommendations, even in terms of vendors or things like that, for those organizations that they may not have had before. We very routinely pop up on each other's programming for those conferences. So there's a number of education-based programs that the American Chemical Society has. So the conference I just came from was from Novache, and we had at least 3 or 4 different sessions specifically on crafting and perfecting resumes. And we participated in resume sessions where students came in with the rough drafts of those resumes, and we literally sat down and advised them on how to update them, but through the lens of, okay, well, what is the career path that you're interested in, and how can we tailor it based on that goal? So ultimately what that means is that the third win is for the students, right? So the student can benefit from enhanced opportunities for program development, increased networking opportunities, and things of that nature. But as I mentioned, those pitfalls to avoid is really making sure that we navigate those relationships carefully. Novache, many of you may not be aware of this, but back in the 70s, Novache, SACNIS, ACES, a lot of these organizations had to form because the majority organizations such as ACS did not welcome scientists and chemists of color. And so we have to be very cognizant of that when we reach out. A lot of the founders of those organizations, they're still around. That memory is still fresh. And so we have to respect that history, honor it, move forward, being aware of that and thinking very carefully and in lockstep with the leadership of those other organizations in terms of how can we help each other.
Thank you so much. I'll need to touch base with you sometime about Novoche, because I experienced Novoche in my early career days when I was still working in the laboratory. So same question to you, reflecting your experiences, what are any recommendations about creating win-win leadership opportunities, and also any pitfalls to avoid?
Sure. So I'll start where Raquel ended, which is asking you to think where your organization acknowledges and names the history of harm and exclusion. And if you don't have that Googleable, that's a good place to start. And people don't want to do that. Universities don't want to do that. Organizations broadly, corporate, don't want to do that. But until you do that, you can't begin to reconcile harm that I think Raquel is alluding to that sounds even recent for some organizations. And so if you don't know the history and you're in a leadership position, I think it's time to dig into that. And digging into that might involve inviting people back into the space where harm was where happened, and they may say no. But I think it's important to acknowledge and reconcile some of the history that's occurred. I also think that your organization has the ability to decide what your strategy actually is around inclusion and equity and justice and defining some of these terms. Some of you may already have that, like your terms are defined, your commitments are defined, but there's national organizations across multiple disciplines in education or in history or in the sciences. It doesn't matter, where they're saying this is our strategic imperative. This is the thing we are focusing on this year, and this is how we're going to get to it. So some of you might think of it as a strategic plan, but it is very specific to how you are going to make your values come to life. It's really easy to say, I really want people in the room, and I really want to ensure that these early career or whatever identity folks feel welcomed and feel safe. Safety is not promised, it's not guaranteed, and it's not absolutely achievable for everybody. And so how are you striving each day to work toward inclusion and safety? And if you can't verbally communicate that anywhere, then that's a good place to start. I also think that when we're including the voice, Raquel shared this, but it's the invitation for people to be part of that space with the understanding that some people may say no, but also we have to consider when we invite people to the room who have been historically marginalized in your field or in society more broadly, the ask to re-traumatize and retell and to do the labor and work for free is problematic. And so when you're bringing in consultants or when you're bringing in people with different perspectives, how are you acknowledging and rewarding them for their time, their labor, their energy, their efforts? That includes at conferences, that includes on panels. How are you saying, I see you, I know this took time, and I want to acknowledge it? And it might look like a variety of ways. I'd also say, what is access look like? What does access look like to your societies and organizations? If people are low income, first gen, moving through this world, just know that they're first gen, meaning they were the first allowed. We oftentimes think of first gen as they're the ones who made it through. No, they're the ones who were allowed by our systems to get through. So when we think about retaining and recruiting people who hold marginalized identities, how are you ensuring that you're reducing or removing barriers that we know put people in different positions, which is typically around finances? So do you have a tiered program where people can pay at a variety of rates based on something that they share with you? And that doesn't need to be the most exposed thing either. Do you have payment plans for membership in your organizations or societies? Do you have opportunities for grants and awards and stipends? Do you have at your annual conferences? So Raquel just listed a series of conferences. Do you have ways for people to say, I might not be able to eat if I attend, and I'd like to attend because that will actually help my career? How do we think about subsidized or stipends for people to apply toward? I mean, these are all things that say, I want you to be there. I don't want you to have barriers. I want you to come and be part of this because we know it will propel you into your career. So thinking about access and what does it mean to be a member and what is the return on investment? most organizations and societies and associations can't really answer that. The return on investment is normally being able to say you're part of it. But what is the actual return on investment to membership if they are part of this organization in your societies? I'd also challenge you to consider, what are your relationships with graduate programs? So if we know most people are coming into space from graduate programs, how are we building relationships with graduate programs so that they're even starting to send the graduate students who will ultimately be in these types of seats to your organization annual meetings and conferences? And then I'll just say lastly, understanding that the systems are the problems and we've created them. So governing board structures, and most of us sit in those in some capacity, are super problematic. Like, they really reinstate hierarchy, power, and decision-making to those who have access to the room. And so there are organizations right now talking about how to decolonize governance in societies and associations like the ones you all are part of, and understand that when we think about systems as the problem, then we will do better for people. People are not the problem. So when you host your conferences, for example, how have you thought about the land that you're going to? So those of you who are joining us from DC, you might not know the Native and Indigenous people who originated here, the Piscataway, the Anacostan, and the Nacotchtank people. When you go visit other spaces, how do you do your due diligence and understand the history of the land? How do you think about physical access into space? So could a wheelchair user or a person who's unable to see in the same ways that maybe you can access the space? Are there all-use restrooms? And it's really all persons restrooms. Like, what are we thinking about when we're curating these spaces that affirm that we want true diversity in that room? And that requires intentional effort. And sometimes people think that's extra work. And I would say, no, it's just doing the work right. So I challenge you to think about some of these perhaps rhetorical questions for now. And if you can't answer them, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, thank you. Those are not rhetorical questions for those doing the work in this space. And there was a discussion this morning about this being a system problem, and we all have a role to play in dismantling the system. So at this point, I'm going to suggest we have questions in the room as well as questions online. And let's start with anyone who might have a question in the room for either of the panelists. We'll do this for maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll have some a final closing question to each of the panelists. Any questions in the room? People are quiet now, late afternoon. Any questions online? Okay.
Oh, yeah. I was just gonna surface a question I saw in the chat. Jordan, Raquel, Vijay, your sentiments are getting a lot of love in the virtual chat and a lot of affirmations. There's a participant who wants to know if you have any advice for measurable or concrete metrics by which we should evaluate our efforts to make societies more inclusive, more diverse, more equitable. Where should we start as far as measuring the progress toward those ends after we have those conversations that Jordan just prompted us to have?
I mean, I can share at least initially, some of it is, did you do it, did you not, right? So some of these elements have a very matter of fact, like, have you gone to your conference site, for example, and done some history checking? Have you posted your history on your website? So if you're talking about the examples I just said, some of it is, did you do it or not, right? But then I think if we're talking about representation, I think you have to have some really authentic conversations about, was this space designed with folks in mind first? So we oftentimes want to run toward increasing numbers of representation, but don't bring me there if it's not going to feel okay to be there. So I want people to actually prioritize fostering inclusive environments. And to the metrics question around that, some of it is undoing, unlearning, doing some homework. Like, if you think about fees, like, if you want to make access to your organization more affordable, then that might be a broad goal. You might then say, this is how we're going to do it. And what I want people to understand is you're going to have to do this all the time. So I think we often want the gratification of it's done, but even something like financial access as a barrier to maybe having true membership, means that, okay, 3 years from now, we're going to say, what's the newest challenge around financial access and barriers? I mean, we're all watching literally flights go up. So we know there's going to be access and barriers that always impact people from obtaining, positions in these spaces. So to me, it's not thinking that this is going to solve all problems, but rather, what is it that we are committed to doing and how are we working to get there? This is no different than any other strategic plan. So every time we talk about, say, DEI or any of these words you want to say, we oftentimes say, oh, it's so much, it's too much, I have to solve racism. Well, if you can solve racism, that is great. It will put me out of a job. But we know that that is a hard obstacle. So let's make it obtainable. And there's people like me, but probably my colleagues online, who literally travel the US to advise people on how to do this well. I would point you to certain universities even that have set up strategies. So Princeton University, their president, President Eisgruber, is deeply committed to anti-racism. He made that very clear. And he's a constitutional lawyer, so he is going to follow the law and also commit to his values. And so he has a strategic plan on anti-racism. Like, this is not an anomaly right now. Like, there are examples out there of organizations, universities saying, these are the things I care about, and this is what we're going to start working toward. But again, it's not that it's going to solve everything forever, but it is going to be where you begin. And if you don't begin, you will never get anywhere. And I think we oftentimes want to get to the end without doing the work it takes. And this is like hundreds of years of work.
Yeah, and Jordan, you were reinforcing a lot of the points that were made in the panels this morning, that this is a journey, but also there were some very good strategies that were raised up this morning as well. But thank you for that, because you're reinforcing some things that have already been stated. Raquel, Vijay, you want to comment any more on metrics?
Sure. I just want to echo exactly what Jordan has been sharing. Your organization has to be extremely intentional. It's not enough to just say, let's do all the things, let's report who's all on our board, let's track all the demographics and share it all the time and not actually have a plan around it. So one of the first things that the American Chemical Society did was add on a strategic goal around embracing and advancing inclusion in chemistry. And it focuses on addressing and identifying what some of those barriers are to full participation so that we can remove them, making sure that we create an inclusive culture, and making sure that we are really walking our talk. And so when you take those three elements and break it down into actionable steps, it can make it much easier for your organization to figure out what a reasonable goal can look like and a measurable goal at that can look like. And it's going to be different for each organization, right? So for ACS, we have a number of education-driven organizations and projects, programs, and initiatives. A lot of those programs can be focused on how can we ensure that everyone is able to participate fully. So to Jordan's point, the cost of access, are there opportunities for us to provide more travel awards? Are there open opportunities for us to just have meals available? You know, when you have meals and free food available, the kids will come running, right? So how can you make sure that you're taking care of some of those basic needs? So yes, it is important to do things like keeping track of demographics and measuring that in reference to that baseline, but what are you doing about it, right? So in our publications division, for example, we're now doing annual data analysis and sharing and being very transparent about who our editors, our authors, and our reviewers are. But not only that, we're making sure that we are actively doing activities to foster and increase that participation, not just based on gender or race, but also based on where they're located geographically, right? Not just focusing on the United States, the UK, and East Asia, but making sure that additional countries can have representation as well. That's just a small example, but Vijay, please.
Yeah, and Vijay, your perspective is very interesting to me because you're coming here, you're representing, you work in industry, you're also very active in FASEP. So your perspective from either one of those viewpoints would be very helpful.
I think, Jordan and Rick covered all. I mean, those are great points, and and it will be hard to add anything on top of it. But what I'll say is, so when you take a step, when you decide that we want to work on inclusivity and diversity. So let's take an example of diversity. So you have the metrics like how many people, how diverse your council is, right? How diverse your say award nomination committee is, because we may not realize, but those committees also influence ultimately how how that is going to percolate into the membership. So, and members do see, when new member comes and they see like who is there in the committee, who is there in the council. So when you track, when you see like, okay, this year I had this much number of certain type of population, this number of certain type of population, and then what is the next year's metrics, what is the year on year metrics. So you track that metrics, and you try to be consistent with that metrics, making sure that you have the diverse population which is representing on your leaderships. I think that is one of the key factor, because that is seen by the membership, like how you are driving the organization.
Yeah, excellent. One of the things that we do at AGU in terms of metrics is we also bring in qualitative metrics. What's your climate? How are people perceiving what you're doing? Do people feel included? Do people feel safe? So I think it's not just demographic numbers, it's more of what environment are you creating that make people feel like they want to
I'll
be
just
here.
offer in that I'm a qualitative researcher, so you just spoke to my heart. And I fully agree that a person's verbal or written opinion is important. So some of you may be familiar with climate assessments. Some of your organizations might be doing them. I've been able to work with several organizations in the last few years and run them for them. And I do think it's really revealing to boards or to folks in leadership that we thought everything was kind of going okay. Like people keep coming to the conferences, people keep joining the webinars, like our return seems to be okay, but then they find out that hurtful things or instances occurred. And I do think that creating pathways for feedback is critical, because if you don't invite it, you probably shouldn't expect to know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So time for one more question in the room. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, who had, no, I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, Beth.
Thank you. Really appreciate this conversation. And Jordan, you mentioned something about decolonizing the governance system, and I'm really curious about that, because what I've seen is that the people that get into committees and leadership positions are the ones that say the nominating committee knows. So it's the circle, closed circle. How do we get beyond that closed circle and really, getting the nominating committee and those involved in uplifting members to leadership positions? How do we do that? What are some kind of specific ideas?
Sure. So I can offer by prefacing this. I've been on governing boards, national governing boards, international governing boards, and sat on nominations and elections committees. And I think they're the most toxic sometimes, because it is the perpetuation of popularity and or people's beliefs on who deserves that space. And if we're not in alignment of what deserving really means, then we're going to probably further some problematic, cycle. So I appreciate your question. I think a few things. I think one, it's naming what are our goals here. So when we think about our goals and we think about the word diversity, when we say who's not at the table, who are we really talking about is not at the table. So I think in order to have aspirations around diversifying, you need to be able to talk openly about identity and saying, there's a lot of us around the table who are white cisgender men. And in order for us to change some of the maybe decisions we're making or be as comprehensive and inclusive as possible, we need to shift that. Often when you say that, white cis men are going to cringe and say, you're taking away my power. So how are we actually educating the board on what does it mean to think about diversity and inclusion before we just jump into these nomination and election conversations? Because people oftentimes feel attacked or feel like they were called out for being something. And it's like, it's not about you. It's actually about all of us in our organization going forward. So we need to sort of factor in the fragility that we know exists among, I think, a lot of boards, and boards meaning just people who have power. in organizations. I would also say that it's okay to almost dream from a blank slate. So we oftentimes edit our processes, but if the process is rooted in, say, white supremacy or patriarchy, it's only going to perpetuate no matter how many edits you make. So if you had time to be pie in the sky on a whiteboard, what would it look like to actually think about a nominations and elections process healthy? What would that look like? And again, don't go from the current document, go from like a dream and aspiration point. The other piece is that many of you have non-disclosure agreements or memorandums of understanding with organizations and people who are brought in to be part of nominations and elections. That means you can probably go out to your general membership and involve them. So there are people who are leading as volunteers in different capacities who might not be on your board. What would it be like to establish a committee and just have them sign a document that says, I'm not going to go talk about this, in the same way all of you do around fiduciary responsibilities and other things. The last thing I would say is that people are only going to want to be part of your governance structure if it actually supports their values and aligns, and or they believe they can be part of change. So if year after year, you're sort of perpetuating some negative things in the organization at conferences, I actually don't want to be part of that. So you can put in all this effort to bring folks into the room, but you have facts in some cases, but examples where people are like, I've only been harmed at that table, indirectly or directly. And so I think we need to be able to start to shift the narrative of governance structures doing well and doing good and undoing harm, because then I want to be part of that. Then I see myself at the table. And I think there's a lot of people who are ready to be the first. They just don't want to think they're going to be the last. And so how are we thinking about preserving and not putting more labor on folks? So it's very common that the queer person at the table is asked to do something about bathrooms, but queer sexuality in many cases, and we're not thinking about their gender. Like, we do a lot of things that we think is right, but that doesn't make sense. So like, how are we all taking on the collective role and responsibility of building relationships year round with our members from historically marginalized communities? So when it's time to tap them and say, we have this cool opportunity I think you're ready for, they actually see that as an honor and not as another unpaid gig that I'm going to have to spend my life and energy doing.
Yeah, that's great. Any more questions in the room
Say-
before we?
Add any questions virtual?
Sure. There's another virtual question about communications within societies and making sure that leaders, those on the governance structure, governance committee, can acknowledge the testimonies of folks who are marginalized and make sure it's communicated instead of transporting that work onto those who are marginalized, most vulnerable, to speak up, to Jordan's point, and face the most risk. So how are there any strategies or techniques, advice for creating healthy communication structures to acknowledge misconduct or activity that can further marginalize folks, and hopefully communication techniques to eradicate that behavior?
Yeah. Any panelists want to take that?
I can
Go ahead.
Yeah, I can comment on from my experience. So again, I'll go back to the same point which I said, having the affinity groups. So sometimes, if organizations are big, it is difficult for the marginalized people, to speak up and reach out to the highest authority. But if there is an affinity-based group, if they know that this is a safe place, and generally, since affinity groups are a little smaller than the whole organization, it is the leadership of the affinity group is accessible, or at least they have certain bondage, so they can access to them. And the organization, the society also empowers that affinity groups to come to the council and speak up about your members, their problems. So that way, that can be one of the channels that works. But this is just one example. Might be Raquel and Jordan may have another some examples.
Yeah, sure thing. So one example we have within the publication side, we recently created a role of an ombudsperson. This is a neutral party that is not within the editorial team, not on ACS staff side, that if an issue comes up with an author, or even a reviewer, they have a neutral party that they can go to and bring their issues to. When it comes to our ACS events and volunteering opportunities, we have a very clear code of conduct that we have in place. I believe we're going to be working on that code of conduct even more to make it very explicit in terms of what happens when you breach that code of conduct and what those repercussions may look like. We also have means of reporting, anonymous reporting through a third-party vendor that collects all of those issues or any of those issues. But I am a huge huge fan, I should say, of having some type of ombudsperson or some type of role. So unofficially, and I'm not even sure that this is the most recommended route, I would say, but many times our Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Respect winds up being the entity that members will come to and say, hey, I'm having this issue and there's something going, I'm not sure even who to report it to or how to report it. A lot of times if people feel uncomfortable with speaking up, you need to have either an ombudsperson in place or some type of office or entity in place where people can feel comfortable enough to bring that, to the table. I think making higher levels of organization as accessible as possible, and being clear about, we really want to hear what's going on. At least having a couple of people throughout your organization matters a lot. But most important is making sure that you have a consistent culture of accountability. If somebody raises an issue and it is not rectified, that doubly hurts the work that you're doing to create a trusting and inclusive environment. So I think hand in hand in terms of having a mechanism for reporting, it's equally important, if not more important, that you have strategies to address bad behavior, nip it in the bud, and be very clear about what those strategies and resolutions should look like.
Yeah, those are great suggestions. And I think you've just reinforcing some of the value of this consortium, because there are various organizations here at different levels of on the journey and different level of resources, but we try to make those types of resources available to all members. And the member and the resource center here does have some good practices along those lines. And then, in fact, there was a workshop or a brown bag lunch last year where I know people came in and talked about leading practices for engaging student and early career members. And one of those practices, one we happen to use at AGU as well, is that we make sure there's an appointment of a student or early career member. We established 5 positions on the AGU council, at least 2 positions on AGU board of directors. So we make sure those voices are in positions of authority and their voices are equal with anyone else in the room. As just some examples of making sure you're proactively giving voice to this segment of our community. So let's wrap up by giving each of you a chance to leave the room with one if you have only one recommendation to make, it could be something you've already said. So if you gave only one recommendation to the people in the room, what would it be? And VJ, I'll start with you.
Sure. If I want to give one recommendation, that will be create a space, have that extra chair at the table in the council, leadership council in your society for the early career representative, because those are the future and they know their problem best. They can speak up, let them speak up for themselves, create a safe environment for them to speak up, and consider just not, that should not be a tick mark. Okay, diversity done. So we have one member. No, listen to them, hear them, and consider their suggestions. They may be naive, but that's okay. You are going to train them to be future leaders, and that's where the society is going to be in their hands.
Thank you, VJ. Raquel, you're next.
It's hard to distill it to just one. because so many good things were said today. I think I'm going to agree with VJ. Give more of your seats of power to younger and rising professionals. I have seen some organizations that have done some very powerful things with the future of their organization when they empower students, graduate students, or even undergraduate students to have a voice and a meaningful seat at the table to share their feedback. That energy, it reverberates out, and it can encourage a lot of early career professionals to see themselves as part of the future leadership of your organization. So get creative, think outside of the box, create those partnerships, and yeah, make space.
Thank you. Jordan, you get the last word.
I would just say that this work is not easy, and it's not designed to be easy. It's the undoing of a lot of history, a lot of harm, a lot of violence that has happened to multiple people, particularly those who have historically marginalized identities. And so if you're looking for the easy answer, it's not there. And I can tell you that what you might be embarking on is creating something that you've never imagined. We oftentimes look to benchmark or look for the blueprint, look for the roadmap. And part of doing this work in sustainable ways is actually creating that yourself. And what it requires sometimes is a humble approach to saying, I don't know. Like, I could be a really good person. I could think of myself as a well-intended person, but I might need to do some work on what does it mean to hold the identities and privileges that I have. I need to get out of the way. Part of good leadership is bringing the right people into the room who can do this with you. And to me, that's a powerful aspect of role modeling. I need to bring others to the table to support us in getting where we need to go. The last thing I will say too is, in leadership, we oftentimes center ourselves. And I think part of this work requires a decentering of being in a position of power, and in fact, an amplification of those who've never, ever been invited, if you will, to the table. And so I leave you with some of the questions I asked before, which was around, was your organization, your association, your society designed with people in mind? And who's been historically excluded, and what can you undo long-term? So equity oftentimes is a Band-Aid, right? It says we can address this right now and it will be okay, but justice is the removal of a barrier so it never reappears. So what can you do to really undo maybe the bad history that we don't want to always talk about, or to create opportunities? And I want you to leave here thinking about those who we want to be at the table as
period.
people
I lecture until 7.
Those who want to be at the table, who deserve to be there. They're not the problem. It's our systems as the problem.
Thank you. Well said. So thank you. Please join me in thanking Dr. West, Dr. Jameson, and Dr. Carle for a stimulating discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Dr. Kale, Dr. West, and Dr. Jemison. We greatly appreciate you all for joining us today. So now I would like to turn to our next briefing. I have next to me Marsha Lesky. Marsha is one of our Leadership Council members. She is from Optica. She's the Senior Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and Volunteer Cultivation. I'm going to bring up my slides. But today we will be talking about, oops, sorry, y'all. We're just going to go through all this. So today we will be talking about some of the tools that the consortium is focusing on. And we are unfortunately having some technology issues. I apologize. Trying to get it. Will not go to our current slide. Yeah, I just advanced it. Sorry, it wasn't going to the current slide. So today we will be talking about making the most of consortium member connections and experience sharing tools. And so we will be starting off with one of the tools that is available as part of the Society Consortium's website. It is the member matching tool. And the member matching tool essentially is a tool that enables members to connect via their interests and some issues that they are focusing on within their society. Previously, the member matching tool had a fixed list of issues and areas for members to identify. So essentially using your consortium member login, you would go in and you would have the opportunity to talk about the different demographics that are within your society size, your revenue, as well as issues that you have been focusing on or ones that going forward you would like to focus on. And the purpose really being for you to connect with other members who might already be focusing on similar things. However, recently we did an upgrade that enables members to have a living list of issues and areas of work to maximize the tool's utility. So previously you could only select set issues that you were focusing on, but now you can actually go in and type in the specific things that you are focusing on or would like to focus on going forward so that you can maximize the utility of the tool. And the tool is a useful resource for members, but the caveat is the more people who sign up, the more useful it is for members. And so today, Marcia is here to talk about how she at Optica has used the member matching tool, specifically what parts have been helpful for her as a consortium member and how she would recommend other societies use the member matching tool going forward. So I'll hand it over to Marcia.
Sure. Are you staying up here with me or I'll switch to you? All right. Well, then I don't need this. Hi, I'm Marcia Lesky. Like Taylor mentioned, the member matching tool, I think, is a great resource, starting place at least. You know, we've all been hearing, I've been hearing everyone talk about being very overwhelmed and frustrated and everything else, and having this sort of exhaustion in working on these issues. And I think a lot of us work on these issues by ourselves in our organization. Some people, am I too short? Sorry. Some people, you know, don't have anyone else even in their own organization that are working on these things with them. And I think one of you know, the websites and the resources that are created by the consortium are great, but you know, there's a lot of information on there and it can be overwhelming, especially if you are doing this just as a part of your own job. And so I think the big benefit of having a consortium like this is having each other. And that's where this tool comes into place, is that you can go on there and find other people that are doing similar work that you are, or that are struggling with the same things you are, and reach out to them directly. So like Taylor mentioned, we want to get more people involved with this tool. We want to continue to improve the way, like the functionality of it and how it's used, so that you can have even more information on there about what you're excited about and what you've done and achieved versus what you're struggling with or what you might need help on. So you can go in and find other people to talk to. One of the questions she had asked me was, well, how do you use it? And that's exactly how I use it. I've reached out to people to say, I've seen you've done this. Can you talk me through how you did it? So that I don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I've had other people do that for us and reach out to us and say, how did you make this happen? And I can walk them through it, give them information, because we don't need to be always reinventing the wheel and doing it on our own. We can better do it and better quickly achieve what we're trying to achieve if we're doing it together. And that's really all I had to say about the tool. Does anyone have any questions about it? Has anyone else used it? I know it's the end of the day. I'm very sorry. I will give you 2 other examples of how I've used it, because I've also used it to literally call someone recently and have coffee with them. And another time during the dark days of the pandemic, actually organized a little virtual happy hour just to talk to other people doing the same thing I'm trying to do in my organization, where I do it by myself. So I encourage you all, get on that link that she shared, get on the website, update your information, and start reaching out to each other.
So up here are 2 QR codes. One being for the member matching tool. So if you take out your phone and scan that QR code specifically, and sharing my screen, I'm not sure why it's small. Yes.
If you go on the website and log in, and you can go to membership, it's very easy to find.
Yes. Caveat is you need to have access to the Society Consortium's website. So if you know your login, you are able to access it. If you do not have a login, I know many people have experienced turnover where they're now representing their society for the consortium, and you might not have a login. I have my email address up here, so please reach out to me and I'll get you the login for your society. And then the other is the consortium LinkedIn platform, and so that's another tool for you to connect with other societies. Specifically, it is a invite only LinkedIn group where if you also scan that QR code, log into LinkedIn, you can hit join. You won't be able to access it right away, but I will approve you. And really the point of this group is to allow members to really connect over LinkedIn, whether it be talking about different events that they are hosting, if they have a resource that they recently published, something that they think is pertinent to other society consortium members, or even if they have a question for the membership and they want a quick response. We really encourage you to use the LinkedIn platform. So these links will also be available when we send out the PowerPoint after. So don't worry if you don't log in now, but just wanted to give you all some time if you'd like to join during the convening. Any questions? All right, so I will hand it over to Jamie to close us out. And then also Felice.
Felice gave me orders to go first, so that's what I'm gonna do. So I think, as I've tried to do each year, I'm going to try, and I may not succeed, but I'm going to try to elevate eight key themes that I heard today that are worth thinking about as we all go forward. Number 1 is that this is a moment of opportunity for equity in science to be seized. It's not a time to wring our hands, but to use them. Activism, while uncomfortable, is necessary for the future of science, and DEI in participation and conduct of science is integral to its excellence. All STEM sectors, including societies, institutions, philanthropy, and government funders, must speak up to make clear that we won't have a promising future in science, society, or the planet if we don't solve the human DEI challenge. Point number 2, each part of the STEM ecosystem has and must own its responsibility for making choices to prioritize gender and racial DEI within the realms where their sector can have the greatest impact. Societies are an important vector for change. They can choose to define DEI as integral to excellence, in their decisions about whom to honor, mentor, support for leadership, and publish. Philanthropy and government funders can choose whom to fund and can facilitate partnerships that might not otherwise happen. Institutions can choose to mentor effectively and to remove systemic barriers. Each organization must recognize its history of creating inequity and how it's perpetuating, but could correct systems of inequity to ground its forward-looking imperatives and ever ongoing work. Number 3, authenticity and accountability in equitable partnerships and collaborations are essential to leverage what each part of the ecosystem and each partner within a collaboration can best contribute, learn from each other, and achieve together. That requires co-creating and aligning goals, determining measures of what success would look like, changing power structures, and prioritizing data to measure progress and identify needs. Number 4, leadership and the will to lead matter. All STEM sectors must have the courage to proactively lift up our equity and diversity values, immediate goals, and aspirations, and to do this even before we may know how we're going to fully deliver. But then energetically figure out how to live our values and goals, how to work toward our aspirations, which requires centering the voices of those who are targeted for inequity, include them in leadership roles and other ways, and do that through means that are safe for them, including things like affinity groups, ombuds, and mentors who can be helpful. Number 5, allies with privilege need to do more. Change shouldn't be and can't be achieved on the backs of marginalized genders and races. Each sector of the STEM ecosystem can create this expectation and, importantly, measure and reward those who contribute. The hidden curriculum for success must be changed where warranted and made accessible otherwise. Number 6, the law is just a design parameter. Scientists can navigate it to innovate for DEI progress. We cannot limit our aims to compliance with law, even as we must comply. We cannot approach law as an impenetrable barrier. Number 7, communications sensitive to different audiences matter and must focus, among other things, on the societal cost of not doing all that each sector of the ecosystem can do to advance equity and diversity in STEM. We have the ability to stem the duration of personal suffering and societal losses that are created by inequity and support our young people of all identities who represent our future. And number 8, the Society's Consortium structure presents a critical opportunity to elevate and extend conversations among members and across the STEM ecosystem to support collaborative efforts that could have the greatest impact. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Felice, and we'll capture this for the future.
We will.
We will.
Turn off the camera. Well, it's always a pleasure to kind of close off the day as co-chair with Billy Williams. I think tomorrow we'll both give some kind of collaborative ending. So there were just a few things I wanted to say. I tried to write down just some words during the course of the day, which maybe reflect what Jamie just said much more elegantly. My granddaughter, who's approaching 4 next week, she's in the bumblebee group. Okay, so I was thinking a lot about bees recently. So, of course. So I think there were a number that came up today that were really important and maybe capture where we are at this halftime before we all drink together and toast each other and move into day 2. Be forward and lean in. Be open and be optimistic. Be dogged. Be diverse and embrace the excellence in diversity. Be honest and reflective. And as we just learned in the last panel, really be honest, be reflective, and engage in self-assessment. I think we as societies need to do that as we responsibly lead our fields and seek to be leaders in all the work sectors that are parts of our fields. Be systemic, but be precise.
be willing to embrace assessment and to pivot, be willing to change, be collective, be collaborative, be intergenerational. And one thing we didn't talk as much about yet, be interdisciplinary. And I think that is a real strength of the consortium. Be courageous and be ourselves. So those were my B's of today. Maybe we'll move to some A's for tomorrow. But I mainly want to say how good it is, even with 60 of our colleagues joining virtually, to look around the room and be together. It's really been a special day. Some of you know that I flew in from Hong Kong to be with you and be together. But I came in really kind of being a little sleepy. But I am now raring to go. So let's have a party and enjoy each other and be together. So thank you.
Thanks, Janie and Felice. So just a reminder, we will reconvene tomorrow morning at 10:15 a.m. Eastern Time with a program that includes a panel on priorities for DEI advancing research agenda at this pivotal moment. We'll also have a lunch for networking and a program featuring AAAS, Johns Hopkins, and Vanderbilt, as well as AERA, sharing their decisions to participate in the pilot of the Ethical Transparency Tool, a tool to support a welcoming climate across the education research ecosystem for everyone by creating a norm of transparency about gender and racial misconduct while treating everyone as sensitive information ethically and minimizing legal and enterprise risk. Finally, there will be a panel on the research and practice of effective communications in a time of DEI backlash. And then we will also have in-person participants who are welcome to join us at 8:15 a.m. Eastern Time for informal breakfast, and then affinity groups will begin at 9:15 a.m. And those affinity groups will be a federal update by Joanne Carney from AAAS, a group on inclusive journals, and then finally the Leadership Council meeting. Specifically, just a reminder about the Leadership Council meeting. Current members of the Leadership Council are welcome to join, as well as those who are interested in getting more involved with the consortium and are interested in what the Leadership Council does. So with that, thank you to all of our virtual participants for hanging with us virtually all day. And now for all of you in person, we welcome you to join us on the AGU rooftop for refreshments and networking. So with that, see you all tomorrow. And I have Billy coming up with an update, so I'll hand it over to him.
To give instructions on how to get to the rooftop. It's not as simple as it might seem, because only one of the elevators will take you to the rooftop. As you face the elevator, it's the elevator to your right. And someone will be there either to escort you up or use their badge to push R in the elevator. And then the elevator come back, take the next group. So we probably only, I would recommend no more than 8 people or so try to go up at once. And if you're more skittish, you can wait for a more empty elevator if you want. But the elevator to the right is someone, once you get to the rooftop, it's easy to find your way, I think. Cornelia, are you going up? Can you take the first group up then? Thank you. Brandon. Stairway. You want to do that?
Asking,
I don't know. I haven't. No. If you go to the. Yeah, we don't recommend that. That's an escape route only. You might, okay. All right, so again, we'll go up in groups and we'll get you up there. It might take 10, 15 minutes to get everybody up there, but so welcome. And if you, hope you can join us. It's very nice weather outside today, DC, if you haven't noticed. So please join us. Thank you.
The windows. So great. I loved it.
Did you, if you can